And welcome everyone to wow, mean. I was just about to say I'm back from vacation. I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. It was a long time in the car, or at least long for me. I know like some people like long car rides. I am not one of those people. But we're back. It's Friday free for all mailbag time. I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. It's Brian, it's Vince, and it will be Ryan eventually. He's having some technical difficulties, but he'll get in here. Don't worry about that, everybody. So it's really like normally we're like, hey, save the recruiting questions till the second hour.
We're just going to get to all of it.
We're going, baby. We're just going to go and we're going to have a great time and it's going to be a lot of fun. But you guys are the ones in charge of this, so make sure you get your questions in. I'm still not, well, I didn't go far enough south.
He went to Kentucky.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of difference. And it was raining most of the time. So there was definitely not a whole lot of sun. But still had a great time with the family and a little recharge of the batteries. So but right back into the swing of things. And
we're glad to have you back, Vince.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back. So, Brian, first things first. This is the mailbag, and we want to do everything that everybody wants us to talk about, which is great. But you happened to put out an article last night, which was, I know that I'm a little biased, fantastic. Let's talk about that just briefly and kind of why you did it, number one.
Well, that's the big thing. Yeah. I want people to understand is, I was talking to my dad about this and I said, like if I would have just wrote this article just on a normal Tuesday for no reason, it would have been petty. It would have been just like, why are you obsessing over this guy? Not that anything in there I haven't believed for a long time. It's just kind of like, we've taken plenty of shots at Brian Kelly in this podcast, and the things I wrote in the article aren't necessarily new to people in this show, but, I didn't really use the space on the website to do it. But I felt like after his comments yesterday, a response was needed. But I want people to understand that I didn't just emotionally go write that article. It was several hours before I published my article. And the reason why, Vince, and I explained this to you, is I reached out to several former players, people that played for Brian Kelly and those before him. I reached out to people that I know that don't have the disdain for Brian Kelly that I have. Because my concern, Vince, and this is what I expressed to you last night, was I don't like the guy. I've made that very clear.
Right.
And if I just emotionally respond to his comments, it's just going to be me versus Brian Kelly.
Right.
And I don't really care to get into that. It was like, so did the players take his comments about them the way that I did? Or did I read my dislike of him into those comments? After I talked to the former players and the people that I know that are close to the program, it was literally everyone was like, get them. You know what I mean? Like, you read it exactly how we read it. It was disrespect to us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Get them. So once I kind of had their blessing, it was ether time at that point. And, and that's why I said what I said, because it all comes down to, you want to complain about, some of the stuff in there is not necessarily, it's not untrue. Notre Dame doesn't have the nutrition program where it needs to be. I'll never hear me say different.
Right.
The issue that I have is that when you're going to act like that's the reason you never won a title at Notre Dame, and the comment about, I want to be with players that, that want to be great,
want to win.
Excuse me.
What?
Yeah. And just some of those comments, and he's been throwing shade at Jack Swarbrick since he left. The reality is Jack Swarbrick's the only reason you got a chance to have the legacy you have, because everybody else basically wanted you gone after 2016.
Yep.
But Jack defended you. Jack was the one that kept you here, right or wrong. I'm not taking a stance on Jack's decision to keep him, but that's the reality of it. And then to throw shade at him the way that you have when Jack is minimum $600 million. I was having a friend of mine who's in the development office, and he's like, you can comfortably say minimum $600 million, comfortably. And we could probably get into it where maybe it was closer to $1 billion. But, so don't tell me that the program hasn't been improved and they haven't done what they needed to do. Jack Swarbrick's the one that told you to tell Marcus Freeman, money won't be an issue for you turning down LSU. So less than, a year after you outbid basically LSU for the best defensive coordinator in the game, you're going to say that Notre Dame didn't, wasn't students centered and all this other stuff. And it was just like the least caring coach that Notre Dame's ever had in regards to players. I had one of the players, he's like talking about being student centered. It's like he would come give us a talk when we got back in January and then leave, go out of town, and we wouldn't see him again until spring ball started. So it's like, how are you going to be student athlete centered when that's the reality?
Right.
And just so people understand, That's a guy that's in the National Football League right now. Everyone that I talk to is a former starter, someone who played, because you guys know my stance on talking to third stringers and things. Not that they deserve any less respect, but it's kind of like there can be more agendas behind someone who maybe didn't play as much. And so I just want people to understand that's what was behind it. And the shots at the players and then just the overall theme of you didn't win. It's like, one of the comments was, you didn't go for 2 in the fourth quarter while up 11 against Northwestern and it failed because you didn't have an on-site chef. You know what I mean? Like, those are your decisions. And that's always been my issue today is Brian Kelly has always blamed everybody else for why he failed. He blamed everybody else for why he didn't recruit hard. He blamed everybody else for why he hired Brian Van Gorder and kept him. Nobody forced him to do that. There's nothing inherent about Notre Dame that caused him to keep Brian Van Gorder beyond 2014, when everybody knew by the end of 2014 that guy was a joke. Nobody forced him to hire Jeff Quinn and keep him for 5 years. Nobody forced him to hire Jeff Del Alexander and keep him for 5 years. Those were all on him. And so it just was one of those things where, people say, like, just leave. Brian Kelly's gone. Great. Brian Kelly's the one that brought this back. And the fact that it was like 2 different articles, it was pure peak Brian Kelly. It was clear spin. It was intentional. It was the same crap that we heard last year about this is the best coaching job Brian Kelly's ever done. And people in the media just lap it up,
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And the hype men come out, and for Brian Kelly and all. And I'm just not having it anymore, because the players are too respectful of the university to clap back at Brian Kelly that way. I'm not an alum. I don't owe the institution that. So I clapped back, and it just needed to be said. So I just wanted people to understand what was behind it. I didn't wake up yesterday with any desire to write an article about Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly wasn't on my mind yesterday. It was about, look, this is what he said. This is what the truth is. And I'll tell you all this. I probably shared 10% of what I know about what went on behind the scenes with Brian Kelly. And even then wasn't direct. If I laid out all the things that I know about what Brian Kelly did and how little regard he had for his players. You could
write a book.
Vince, maybe half of it.
You could write a book.
Because I've shared stuff with you.
Yeah.
He would be done.
Yeah.
I mean, he would be done. But I'm not going to do that because that would out players. But there's a reason why I have the disdain I have for Brian Kelly. And it's not anything personal beyond I don't like coaches that treat players the way that he treated players.
Yep.
I don't like coaches who cheat the game and cheat kids. And that's who Brian Kelly is, and that's who Brian Kelly always will be. And we saw it. Look, I supported the hire of Brian Kelly. We should have saw it then, though. We should have saw it then. The way
the inklings were there, Cincinnati, yeah. And I brushed that aside. I was like, what is he supposed to do? But looking back on it, absolutely. And you mentioned Jack Swarbrick, keeping him around in 2016, and was that the right decision and all those different things? The way I look at it personally is that if he doesn't come back and the process of all the things that happened, all the events that took place from 2016 until December of 2021, they all took place for a reason, and that's why Marcus Freeman is now the head coach at Notre Dame.
Yes.
And that's the way I look at it.
That makes it worth it.
And that makes it worth it to me.
For
Absolutely.
us.
For
but
us.
It doesn't make it worth it for the players who don't get to play for Marcus Freeman.
Exactly.
They were cheated. Look, the Notre Dame had the roster in 2015 to play for a championship. They didn't have the coaching, right? So don't talk to me about, they didn't have the right players. No. They didn't have the right head coach, who didn't hire the right strength coach, who didn't hire the right defensive coordinator. If you want to thank someone for hiring Matt Bayless, thank Bob Diaco, because Brian Kelly was about to hire someone from USC as his strength coach after 2016. And Bob Diaco called him, who had just been fired at UConn, and he said, and Matt Bayless was Bob Diaco's strength coach. And Bob Diaco's the one that called Brian Kelly, was like, hey, man, you need to slow down on this hire. You need to talk to my guy, Matt Bayless. So you can thank Bob Diaco for that, right? So Brian Kelly wasn't dumb enough to say no. That's where Brian Kelly gets the credit for that one. I've said this before. It was Jack Swarbrick and Chad Klunder that made the drive to hire Chip Long and Mike Elko, which inherently brought Clark Lee because Mike Elko was bringing Clark Lee with him. And so the best hires that Brian Kelly made were not hires he wanted to make or was driving the bus to make. And those are just one of the many reasons why Brian Kelly, if Brian Kelly, and this is the one comment that I put in there that I felt really needed to be said, was he crossed a line with his comments yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Because he took a shot and blamed players essentially, and that's how they took it. Most of them that all the ones I've talked to took it. I'm assuming there's going to be some that don't agree with me. That's always the case. I'd be shocked if there aren't. But the reality is he took a shot at them when in reality it was them that propped him up, not the other way around. And he never gave them what they gave him, and that right there is at the heart of what I wanted to say yesterday. So. I'm ready to move on to the questions now, but I really felt the context of why that article was written, because I'm assuming there's some people that read my article that don't know where it came from.
Right.
Like, why are you writing this? Why are you responding to this? And I just want people to understand this wasn't about me disliking BK. This was about, and I don't. I mean, I've never hidden that, but I put thought into whether or not to even write it. Because I tweeted initially like, well, I know what I'm working on tonight. That was my emotion. But then I was like, hold on a second. Like, is this really what I need to do? And that's why I reached out to the people I reached out to. And that's why it took me a couple hours to get that together, right? Because, I wanted to make sure. And Vince, there were several rewrites because I took out some really hard shots at him. I took out.
And I wanted to mention that because there's probably been a handful of times where you've had me proof an article for you. Like, hey, how does this sound? You know what I mean? And yesterday was one of those days. Like, you wanted to make sure that it came across correctly. It wasn't just cheap shot after cheap shot, right? And not saying that you would do that, but you didn't even want it to come across that that's what it was going to be. And so,
right. Like, I had no problem taking shots at him, but I wanted to make sure that the shots were built on truth and fact.
Right.
And then it wasn't just petty shots at him.
Exactly.
The shots were meant to prove a point that was at the heart of the article.
Right.
And that these were your decisions. And I didn't even bring up like the Clemson stuff, the 2-point conversion. My buddy was like, you need to bring that up. And I was like, that's just a disagreement. I mean, you can agree to disagree about that decision. The Northwestern one was obvious. The Tulsa one was obvious. You had a losing record in your career against Stanford. Let's not kid ourselves. It's like Stanford had these wonderful facilities and it just, but it's just who Brian Kelly is. It was never his fault. Brian Kelly, how many games did he win at Notre Dame? What was his record at Notre Dame, Vince? I'm going to pull this up.
I remember you said 59-9 or 54-9.
54-9 in the last, however many years, right? It's like the last 5 years. 54-9. He went 54-9.
Yeah.
His overall record at Notre Dame, pull it up here real quick, was basically 113-39. Right? Basically, if I'm doing the math correctly, in Brian Kelly's mind, he was 113-0. And the Notre Dame players and the Notre Dame institution was 0-39. I mean, that's how he views it. And that's why he needed to get slapped in the face a little bit yesterday. And I'm not going to lie. I'm glad that I could be the one to do it.
Him leaving was best for everybody.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way. It was good. He sees it as best for him.
Yeah.
Great. But it was also great for us and Notre Dame faithful people.
Yeah.
So
let's bring Ryan in. Ryan, are you good to go?
Woo, Ryan.
I'll make sure he's good to go. Okay. Got Ryan with us here. Let's get rocking and rolling. Put you guys up at the top, but let's get to the questions, man. So we got that out of the way, and now we can move on. Vince, if there's questions or people want to make comments about what we just talked about, that's fine. I mean, just
those will probably be towards the bottom. There's a couple super chats.
If it's something if it's something that like just. Yeah, I just use discretion on what we do. And
I'll put you in charge of the super chats. You can pull those up as we go as well. Sure. How's that sound?
Might as well get started on one, right?
Well, let's do that. From Toe Jam 1992. Thank you so much for the super chat. Brian, epic takedown of BK. Thank you. What is the over-under on the number of LSU pancakes we get on today's show?
Let's go 5.5. Let's do the number we did from yesterday.
5.5.
Over.
Taking the over. Yeah, it's probably over. It is what it is.
Ryan, you're responsible for that. You're at the bottom waiting on those guys to come up. So that's your task for today.
That sounds good.
No, thank you for that super sticker there,
yes,
buddy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just kind of get these initial super chats out of the way, and then we'll dive into the questions.
From Alex, thank you very much for the super chat. I know it really ticks me off when I give it several hours to marinate, and I'm still ticked. BK's comments were trash. And I loved your article, Brian. You spoke for a majority of Notre Dame fans. Thanks. Agreed. From Zach Martin, thank you.
Well, I know
much.
that I spoke for some players. That I do know.
You're right. Absolutely.
That I do know.
Zach Martin with the super chat. Thank you very, very much. I guess the LSU's spread is made up entirely of Tobias Merriweather's dad's burnt ends.
Nice reference there.
There's a lot going on right there.
There's some really good references there.
There's
really good references there.
Michael Brahoni, thank you very much for the super chat. I know everyone is excited about the new coaching hires, and rightfully so. But which position coach would you consider the strongest, excluding Freeman? Golden, Hiestand, or other?
Well, to me, Vince, I think it's Hiestand simply because of the importance of the position and his proven pedigree. It could end up being Al Golden. It could end up being Al Washington. It could end up being, Chancey Stuckey. I mean, there's guys that I think could be candidates, Dylan McCullough.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at the importance of the position and just how bad it was a year ago, I think we have to look at Coach Hiestand, because Al Golden's stepping into a good situation. He's inheriting a group that, Mike Elko and Clark Lee and then Marcus Freeman kind of built into something really good, and it's just don't screw it up. Coach Hiestand and Coach Stuckey especially are being tasked with fix this thing.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say, those are the strongest. Those are the positions where you have to, like, if Al Golden is just a good coach, it's going to be really good because he inherited a healthy situation. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Al Golden. It's not that he won't deserve credit. It's just, it's easier to maintain.
Yeah.
Whereas if the offensive line plays its potential, it's like you had to same thing with the receivers. You had to overcome inheriting something that was a bit of a mess, and you had to fix it.
Yeah.
And so for Al Golden to really have an impact, he needs to take it to the next level. Well, that's going to be a challenge for him. I mean, you lost some really good players, and it was already a pretty good situation. And so that's why I would go with Coach Hiestand. I'd probably go with Chancey Stuckey second.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Just because, I mean, of what we're hearing so far. But, we'll see what happens with Al Golden. Well, we just haven't seen enough of the defense in the spring events for me to be able to say, one way or the other.
And the one full practice didn't really give me a whole lot, to be perfectly honest with you. But here's what I will say. Chancey Stuckey was the name that came into my head first, but it has to be Harry Hiestand. And the reason being is because it's not that I think the wide receivers are going to be bad or that they're not going to take a huge jump, because I think they are. But the offensive line, with basically the same guys, for the most part, basically the same guys, are going to take such a massive step, and they affect both the run game, pass. They just affect more just because of who they are and just because of the position, right?
If Chancey Stuckey proves to be the best coach in the receiver, he impacts two positions, quarterback and the receivers.
Absolutely.
Right? Like Harry Hiestand impacts everybody. And that's why Al Golden probably be the second choice if he is able to. It's hard for me to put him in there because we just have of how little we've seen Vince. That's really what it boils down to. It's not anything against Coach Golden. It's just I need to see more.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
That's the
absolutely. Thing. Absolutely.
And then I think that is it with the.
Is that it for your side?
So
okay. I'm up at the top.
Yeah.
I will get this one out of the way. Tommy Guns asking how the Riley Wildcats are looking. Dude, the weather has been terrible. We've played one game. I had a lot of unforced errors, so we lost that one game. Who knows when we're going to play again? We've already had 4 games canceled, so we look real good in a gym. So there you go. Hopefully, we've got 4 games scheduled for this coming week. So hopefully we can get something moving in that direction. So.
Sorry, I had to.
That's fantastic, by the way.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
I did want to answer another question. Is there any way we can get the unedited version of the article?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Because the last thing you want is for it to come off petty, because that is not the angle that you wanted to take. No. So,
childish is, I guess, unprofessional.
That's fair. Yeah,
like I don't mind. There's a couple petty things I said, but it was intentional. I didn't want it to come off unprofessional, and I hope that and some people will think it was. I don't care. I mean,
I'm gonna put the unedited on the premium message board.
Yeah. Ryan didn't get to see the unedited, the true unedited version. So nobody actually saw that one. My original Vince, you got the 3rd rewrite.
I was gonna say I didn't get a bunch of stuff in there that I was in. Yeah.
No.
So John A1, we can always count on John to load us up with some questions on the top. He says, which Notre Dame offensive line was the most athletic based on agility, flexibility, foot quickness, and how do you project the 22 offensive line athleticism in comparison?
That's a good question.
That's a deep question, man.
Yeah. Athleticism, I'd probably go 2015, Ryan. Just because you had Stanley and Quentin back to back. Nick Martin was a pretty athletic kid, but then I start thinking I don't know, because you have to think of okay, there had to be at least one individually athletic guy, and so you said, okay, Alex, Zach Martin was, but then it's but Braxton Cave wasn't an overly athletic guy. Mike Golick wasn't necessarily, and then 2011, I think the 2011 line actually wasn't a great line, but it Trevor Robinson and Taylor Deaver and Chris Watt and Zach Martin. That was a line with some pretty good athletes, but I'd probably have to go 2015. Ryan is because that was from left to right. It was Ronnie Stanley, Quentin Nelson, Nick Martin, Steve Elmer, and Mike McGlinchey. I'd probably have to go with that group from a pure athleticism standpoint.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, you're talking about two NFL level tackles who are both considered good athletes for their position. They both have length. They're both athletic. I mean, Steve Elmer also had a lot of length to him too, and he was a good athlete on the interior. So, yeah, I think so. I mean, I can't think of another one because I mean, like the 2020 line was a good line as well, but I didn't consider many of those guys incredible athletes. They were more technicians, if anything.
Right. Or in Aaron Banks's case, pound for pound was an athletic guy, but not necessarily like a elite athlete. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the 2022 offensive line has a chance. We're just talking pure athleticism. Has a chance because I would probably go 2015 number one. I'd have to really think hard about 11 versus 17. I'd probably have to think hard about that one. For number two, but I think the 2022 offensive line from a pure athleticism standpoint has a chance to be number one, guy. We're not talking straight athleticism. We're talking straight athleticism because Joe Alt's an athletic player.
Yep.
Blake Fisher, I mean, pound for pound is one of the better athletes Notre Dame has had. Jared Patterson to me is the most athletic center that Notre Dame has had.
Agreed.
And then you look at Andrew Kristofik's pretty good, pretty decent athlete for a lineman. Josh Lugg as a guard, his athleticism grades out better as a guard than it does as a tackle. So, Ryan, I think this line has a chance, again, just from a pure athleticism standpoint, to be in the conversation for the best of that group.
I mean, all five of those guys could play offensive tackle on the college level.
They all have.
Yeah. Even Patterson backed up left tackle as a freshman, right?
So, even Kristofik played some. I mean, Patterson's the only guy who hasn't played tackle in a game at Notre Dame. If you think about it, I mean, because Lugg started games at tackle. Andrew Kristofik early in his career, when he came off the bench, his early playing time in his career was as a tackle. So Patterson, who may be, one of your second or third best athlete on the line, is the only one who didn't play it. But to your point, Ryan, was recruited to play left tackle.
Yeah. No, your shortest guy is what's Jared Patterson? 6'4.5", somewhere in that ballpark, right? It's right. I mean, they all are long athletic players, and that's the reason that they all could play tackle or have played tackle to some degree in the college level. So I think from a pure athletic, I mean, Kristofik's a really good athlete, especially for a guard, right? Like he's athletic enough to play offensive tackle, in my opinion. He's a really good athlete inside. Blake Fisher's a freak show. I mean, from a size, athleticism perspective.
I think he's a better athlete than Ronnie Stanley was. I mean, again, just athleticism. I think he's a better athlete than Ronnie was. Ronnie was nimble, but Ronnie, I mean, his numbers at the combine were pretty bad. I mean, they were not good, but he plays athletic, and that's what I care more about. But I would argue that Blake Fisher's a better athlete than Ronnie Stanley was at the same age. And I certainly think Joe Alt's a better athlete than Mike McGlinchey. Now, is he as powerful? Is he going to be as good? And all that's a different question.
Right.
But from a pure athleticism. So I think tackle absolutely stacks up with the best line that we talked about. Then the question is, okay, what about interior? And that's where, for me, it gets a little bit saying I'm not going to just definitely give it up because Quentin Nelson was an athletic guy, especially for his size. Nick Martin's a good athlete. Steve Elmer was an okay athlete. Steve Elmer and Josh Lugg, to me, is a bit of a wash athletically. It's now about who's more athletic, Patterson and Kristofik or Q and Nick Martin. And I'm not quite ready to definitively say it's the 2022 group. That was a pretty athletic 1-2 punch. I mean, from center to left tackle in 2015 was pretty freaky. I mean, from an athleticism standpoint. Nick Martin's your third most athletic guy. Quentin Nelson, that's the thing I don't think a lot of people understand. For a 340-plus pound guy, he's an exceptional athlete.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely,
I'd probably still lean 2015 for now, but the 2022 group has a chance once we get to see them play with a year under their belt in the way. Because that's the other thing, guys. We're going off of what Joe Alt and Blake Fisher did as true freshmen, right? And that has to be considered as well. So that's my take.
All right, we got another offensive line question from Notre Dame 2164. Did Rocco fall out of contention for a starting spot by his performance this spring? Not saying he has been terrible, but I've just been hearing that he looks kind of slow and sluggish.
I think it's too early for us. Look, I want to remind people the media has seen one full practice. Notre Dame's like what 9 deep now, Vince? 9 deep in the practices.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah,
we have the media seen one full practice
and then a couple of stretches,
2 parts of others, which gives you some individual and all that. And like I had a good buddy of mine was at practice yesterday, and he was telling me like how bad the quarterbacks played and how he's worried about this year. And I'm like, my man, that's one practice out of 9, right? Like I've heard from, and the funny thing is I had another friend of mine who's really tied into the program text me last night. He's like, man, Buckner's having a great spring. And it's just, that's what I love about it, right? Because, but here's the thing though. My buddy last night was looking at the context of the entire spring.
Sure.
Right. My other buddy was looking at what he saw
practice
yesterday. Right. And so that's the thing is we got to be careful with that. And that's what I always kind of get nervous about putting those type of negative observations because they can be taken, you know, even the positive ones. I mean, somebody has a great day. That may have been the only good practice they've had. You know, we don't know. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not ready to say that Rocco's fallen out of contention. Again, it is the spring. I think there's more important things than necessarily his agility right now. It's, are you learning? Are you competing? Because then you can kind of whoop him into shape. If he's doing other things really well, mentally picking up the offense, battling hard, really showing strength, but his foot quickness is the problem. You can fix that between the end of April to the beginning of August, right? So I don't think he's fallen out of contention, and I think we definitely can't say that based on what we've seen so far because we just haven't seen a lot, and good or bad, and that's why we've tried to rely on what we've heard from source and like any source that I give on like the intel pieces is people that I know for a fact are looking at things from a bigger picture, like a whole spring point of view, not just someone who was at a practice. Because I've gotten plenty of comments from people that were at a practice, and sometimes it's like, okay, your comments aren't falling in line with other things that I have heard from people that are kind of there every day.
Right.
And so you have to measure all of that stuff and go with it. But that's
because no matter what sport you're talking about, one practice does not make you can only glean so much from one practice, right? As a head coach, as an assistant coach, as a media member or whatever. Yeah, you could be really impressed with a kid for one practice, but can they sustain it? That's the biggest question, right? And you're not going to know that and can you sustain it in a positive way or sustain it in a good way, right? And you're not going to know that unless you're at every practice.
So it's like if the only time you ever saw Tom Brady play was in the second Super Bowl against the Giants, would you be like, wow, that guy's the greatest of all time? Right. No. If the only time you ever saw John Elway play was in the Super Bowl against the 49ers, you'd have a very different of opinion of someone who watched him for the entirety of his career. Sure. I'm using those extreme examples to show that like you're not defined by what you do on your worst day, basically. And that's why you got to be careful that anytime you're making it, it's like when you're a coach, you don't watch a kid have a bad game and say, we're not recruiting that guy. It's but the other 3 games he was phenomenal. You got to be careful with that.
You have to do your due diligence.
On the flip side too, hey, this guy played phenomenal. Okay, he had a great game when you saw him, but here's a couple other games that you may want to consider as well.
Right, absolutely. John asks, what are the components or attributes of an offense that has a strong screen game?
I mean, we already started it off a little bit with the question about offensive line, right? Like you need an athletic offensive lineman to get out in front and navigate space. I mean, that's one thing. Running backs that have good vision in the open field, or just playmakers, I should say, because it doesn't necessarily say running back screen. So you need playmakers that have the ability, again, to read blocks, read space, ability to navigate through it effectively. And you need patience, honestly. Patience is a big key, especially running back screens. Like you can't rush those things. You have to be able to really kind of let things develop. And the components are also the fact that, like, hey, you need a solid offensive attack otherwise, right? You need a running threats. You need the ability to take advantage. You need a smart coaching staff to understand, like, oh, here comes the pressure. Here comes the different pressure packages. They're bringing 6 this time, whatever it might be. So there's a lot of components to it, but I think the main criteria is you need playmakers that can navigate space really well. You need offensive linemen that can get out and be athletic enough to counteract defenders in space as well.
There's one more really important piece to this as well. And everything, Ryan, you said is spot on. Timing. And that's from a play design standpoint. Timing to a screen is important. And sometimes that can mean quickly getting the ball out, right? Like if you hold a bubble screen too long, it's not going to work, right? And then when we think of screens, we think of the more slower developing, the slips and things like that. That's another piece to it too, Ryan, is all the things you said. You need linemen that are good in space. You need backs that have good vision because you got to square up and you got to see things quickly. Where am I going to go? You're going to get out in space. Hey, how do I set up a lineman? Like vision includes like knowing where this guy is so I can set my lineman up, all that kind of stuff. But from a play design and an execution standpoint, timing is important. And that was something I thought for years was the problem for Notre Dame. I felt like their screens were always poorly designed and timed. Like they were obvious. You could see it right away. They were either too slow or too fast. That got better last year, I thought. And there's still room for improvement, but I thought that was one of the reasons we saw, a little bit more the last couple of years. I think Tommy Rees has done some really good things with the screen game. We saw just even back to his first game as an OC, true game as the OC against Duke 2 years ago. We saw the screen early where they faked a reverse to Jafar Armstrong, pretended like they were going to throw a bomb, and then dumped it off to Jafar on a screen. In that same game, they threw a quick, look screen outside. Now screen, some people call it, to Kyron Williams that went for 75 yards, right? And then I think there was another screen to Chris Tyree that game that was more of a traditional slip screen. So I think variety is good, Ryan, and not just having like a screen, but a package of it that keeps people honest.
Well, I think they have the playmakers this year where the screen game can be elements. I mean,
different types too, like different types of screens. Yeah,
exactly.
I would love to see Audric Estime square up a defense on a slip screen.
Right. Get downhill.
Hey, Mr. Corner.
Even Logan Diggs just kind of he comes to me as like a player that really is slippery in space.
And we saw it. Was it Navy or Georgia Tech? What was the one where he scored on a slip screen? Was it? I think it was Navy, right?
Maybe Navy. We saw it in the practice that we had availability to, right? He took a screen and took it to the house,
40 yards. Yeah, I forgot about that. That's right. And he made a nice move, but he set the lineman up for that. So it was very well done. Good question, John. Very good question.
Very good question. When Tyler Buchner was on the field, the run game opened up every time with one exception, Cincinnati. With a dual threat quarterback, does the standard for run game efficiency rise?
Absolutely. And that's something that Notre Dame has talked about. And we've talked a lot about, John, is when you have a quarterback that's a legitimate threat as a runner, not as a scrambler, but as a runner, that has to be determined. Because I never felt like Ian Book benefited the run game as a runner. Because Ian Book wasn't a guy that really kept the ball a lot on read zones. Ian Book's most of his yards, and he ran for a lot of yards in Notre Dame. A bunch of his yards, Vince, were on scrambles. He had a couple draws that went for big gains, but you weren't running like power reads a lot. You weren't running read zones a lot. It was a lot of scrambles. That doesn't really impact the run game the way that like a Brandon Wimbush would, or a Deshaun Kaiser, or what we anticipate with a Malik Zaire and what we anticipate with Tyler Buchner. And Everett Golson was a lot like Tyler Buchner, right? Like Everett wasn't a guy that ran a ton on design runs, especially in 2014. He did occasionally in 2013. He would pull it on a read zone. He had one against Oklahoma that went for a third down that moved the chains. But in 2014, we didn't see as much of that from Everett. It was more scrambles where he had the impact. I think Tyler Buchner will be more like the Malik, the Deshaun, the Brandon Wimbush, where you'll see more designed runs, or at very least a decent amount of read zones where he's going to keep the ball. And that includes the pure inside zone read, but also like power reads. When I say read stuff, I'm referring to the entire package of read concepts, not just the read zone.
We made it 35 minutes into the podcast without a Dante Moore question. I figured now is the time. Mm-hmm. So, Luke Walker. Dante Moore recently had an interview with 247 and said his recruitment could stretch into his senior season. How much would your confidence wane if Dante Moore waits that long?
Quite a bit.
Yeah. I I mean, I don't expect it to go into the season. So as of right now, I feel like Notre Dame's in a very good position right now. So if it draws out like that, then
that means something's changed.
Thinking.
Yeah, that means something drastic has changed.
Or he's just not 100% sold that Notre Dame's place for him. I mean, that's all. Like if he decides to take all 5 officials and all that, it's more than just I want to experience the process at that point in time. So yeah, I think at that point in time, there's legitimate reason to be concerned.
And how many officials has he taken up to this point?
Well, none. No one can take officials yet.
Oh, okay.
They don't start till June. Yeah.
See, there you go.
Yep.
Yeah. I had to pull this up. I want to pull this up, Vince.
From Ryan, he says, notice BK said Saban encouraged him to take the job. I see this as Saban not being at all concerned with BK in the SEC rather than Saban thinking about the career benefit to BK. What say you?
I'm so glad Ryan said that because I thought it was just me. I want to be like, that's not making the point that you think it's making, Ryan.
Exactly.
Like when your arch rival's like, yes, take the job. That means he's praying because he knows who you are.
He wants to play you every year.
He knows he will crush you. That is the funniest thing I've ever read. Like, and I thought that was just me being petty. So I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought that. But I was just thinking, like, dude, that's not making the point that you think it's making.
Have you guys seen what is his name? Joey Milano, the guy that does
Molinaro or whatever.
Molinaro, the guy that does the impressions that did a conversation between Kelly and Saban.
That was great.
That's
right.
Kelly had to
that's a freaking Massachusetts. And he was like, I do declare. He's doing all that kind of stuff.
Best of all time, man. Best of all time. My wife was hysterically crying during that. She doesn't even have any rooting interest in it, you know?
If you haven't seen that, you've got to see it. It was hilarious.
That was funny.
That was funny. It was after BK's family,
family.
And he's like, I didn't even realize I was doing. Yes, you did.
Shut up.
You knew exactly what you were.
He doesn't do anything that's not calculated.
No, and not in those type of settings.
That goes for.
And that's why some of the dumbest stuff he ever said was after a game when it was more about emotion.
Yes.
But when he speaks, and like some like the comment about what was it at halftime he got in trouble for, it was a Florida game. Like, I want to. What was the comment? Like, somebody.
How do you feel about execution? I'm in favor of it.
Yeah,
that one.
And it was like, that was more of an emotional response because he was trying. It was a scripted emotional response.
It was him trying to be funny.
Right.
He's not funny.
Right. But that's him. Is when he's speaking like off the cuff, he's not very good. When he speaks at like press conferences, trust me, he goes in. He went into that halftime thing with a very clear purpose of trying to relate to people, and he thinks they're a bunch of rubes. So, because he thought Notre Dame fans were a bunch of rubes.
Oh, absolutely.
So I can only imagine what he thinks of the, all those Cajuns down there. So trust me, that's what I want to say to all these LSU fans. You're defending a guy that doesn't give 2 craps about you. And he will use you as a reason why he fails when he fails at LSU. So just keep that in mind.
Enjoy it. John says the reverse play. Does Notre Dame have wide receivers that can aid the run game consistently game to game?
Yeah.
And they know it.
Lindsey.
Yeah,
and they know it.
Lindsey and Styles have both made big plays on jets and reverses in their careers.
Right.
So no
question. I'll just leave it at that. They know they have the right personnel to do that stuff.
Yeah, they're good. Thank you, Vince.
Sorry, I almost went probably.
You almost did it.
I almost did this close.
You kind of did it, but it's all good.
It's whatever. Okay, John, short yardage defense in 22. Does the penetrating style remain effective versus tight formations when it's undersized?
Yes.
It does, if you have good linebackers.
Sure.
That's the key. If you have good linebackers, yes. Because the reality is that, yes, you can get penetration stops, but if your penetration doesn't get to the gap that the ball is going, you have to have linebackers that can come right off your butts and hit with force. And I don't think they always had that last year because Drew White just didn't have the punch to be effective there. Like 3rd and inches was not Drew's down. He was a much better down 1 and 2 guy, in my opinion, just because of just the size, right? But yeah, if you've got Marists and if JD Bertrands and the Bo Bowers and the Josh Burnhams and the Junior Tuihalamacas of the world.
I like speed.
Yeah, you penetrate because you get the offensive lineman turned or stopped, and then your linebackers hammer the other gaps. You can be real effective there. But yes, Ryan is Brian is absolutely correct.
Marist for All-American. Started early, Brian.
Yep. I mean, I'm hearing it a lot. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine last night, and he was asking me about the team, and Maris's name came up, and I was like, the next time I said, if I had $1 for every time somebody told me, that somebody that's been into practice or whatever has told me like, Maris is going to be a problem, I say I could take my wife out to dinner tonight, because it's a constant theme.
It was a constant theme last spring until
well, no, last spring
I'm sorry,
last didn't
fall.
have a good spring last fall. The summer.
Thank you.
Because he had a great summer,
and he had a great. The practices that he had in the fall were amazing.
Were really good.
Yeah. Kay Grant dropping the huge super chat. Thank you very, very much. Just got off work, so I'm behind here. But did Brian lay the smackdown on Kelly yet? The answer is yes.
Well, not on the show. But in the article. We just because I don't feel like somebody was like, you need to do a show about it. I was like, we did this like a week ago when Sean and I did that Why Marcus Freeman Will Win show. I mean, that part of the good chunk of the show was like, that's to say the stuff I wrote in the article yesterday isn't really new to people in the
chat over here.
Like it was just kind of more done in a written form.
Can I just say my favorite part is people commenting to you about where was this when Brian Kelly was still here? That's my favorite part. Like, you don't know.
You got the wrong dude, man.
That's my favorite part, man. Every time.
You can say many things about me, but saying that I was a Brian Kelly apologist for the last 5 years is not one.
Not one of them. Sorry. John says Prince Collie seems to have a chance to push for the middle linebacker spot, competing with Bo Bauer. If he jumps ahead this spring, how hard will it be for J.D. Bertrand to catch up in the fall?
Not hard. I mean, because the thing is, JD's got a whole season of what we know of what he can do, right? And good coaches don't often just dismiss guys who are out because of an injury, especially he's out of an injury because of him playing. I mean, he was playing for you. He was helping you, have an 11-2 football team. Yeah. So, no, I don't think it'll be hard. And I don't know if Prince is definitely going to be like the guy at Mike. I think it's more about him getting some reps there because they're cross-training guys a lot in the spring. I think ideally they want him to be that guy at will that can spell Marist and help him there. But if he's too good to not play, then he'll play. I think the guy that needs to be more worried about Prince taking time at Mike is Bo Bauer, not
right. I agree. That would be. I would agree with that as well.
And Vince says that I agree with such hurt.
It hurts my heart. It does hurt my heart.
And look, anyone that knows Bo loves Bo. Bo's a great kid. It's not about that. Great kid. Had a chance to meet his mom a couple times. She's really cool. It's not personal. It's just this is what we see on film. I hope he proves me wrong because I still say if Bo Bauer figuring it out up here would do wonders for this defense.
Yeah, no doubt.
There's no question about it. Because when he does what he's supposed to do, I mean, he's an impressive guy.
Right.
He's really downhill athleticism is really good.
Yes, sir. Lou Holtz won the national title in his third year. Would Irish Breakdown project Coach Freeman to win a national title year 3 or even before?
I'm an optimist before. I'm an optimist.
Yeah, I would. I mean, I think he's going to have a shot his first 2 years.
Yeah, I think he's got a great shot. I mean,
but yeah, year 3 will. And the thing about year 3 is, that's going to be when the current freshman class of Jalen Sneed and Tobias Merriweather and those guys are going to be juniors. This incoming freshman class will be going into year 2. I mean, that's kind of where you want to be. I mean, that's where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in today's era, you can have more of an impact from year 2 guys. I mean, look, we've talked about this with Clemson. I mean, the year that they won their second title, they had a true freshman quarterback. Their best receiver was a true freshman. They had a true sophomore was their number 2 receiver. A true sophomore was their best running back. So, I mean, you can
win with young guys if you coach them up properly and you scheme properly. And I have no doubt in my mind that the current coaching staff can do that. And we're going to see the youth and the talent on the field. That's what we're going to see. And so I think he's got a great shot of doing it, whether it's year 3 or year 2 or year 1. I mean, I could definitely see it. Now, I will also say that certain things have to go your way and certain things in the landscape of college football have to go your way. Just like we talked about prior to the 21 season on how the landscape of college football laid out perfectly for Notre Dame. They just weren't able to capitalize on it completely.
And this is why we had the reaction that we had to the Tennessee State game in 2023.
Right.
Because that is a year where things should be good for you. I mean, and Ohio State and you and Clemson are most likely both going to be breaking in new quarterbacks that year. And, I mean, there's just a lot to kind of,
sure.
You don't want to do anything that's going to hurt your chances that year.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons that we looked at the game the way that we did, but it's a different conversation for a different day. But yeah, I think they'll certainly have a chance. Have a chance. And I'll say this, Marcus Freeman's walking into a better situation than Lou Holtz walked into in 1986.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No question about that. Corey D says Clarence Lewis is going to be an important piece to the Notre Dame defense this year. However, what are the chances of Barnes capturing the starting spot from Lewis? Barnes, from all indication, is playing well.
Ryan, you want to take a shot at that one? Because I just, the whole time I'm hearing this question read, I'm thinking of the text you sent me the other day.
Going to be an important piece in Notre Dame defense this year. I mean, look, I saw Barnes in the practice. Obviously, we saw him, and he's a very impressive kid, right? And we did a breakdown where we talked about the difference between field and boundary corner, and I think that really becomes less and less important when if you had a guy like a Ryan Barnes on the other side of a Cam Hart, because they both have the length and athleticism to do a little bit of both. So I think that Barnes is an ideal player to fight into the role. Clarence Lewis, for me, is a guy that I think can be used kind of a bit of all over, though. He's a guy that, like, I would love to see in the nickel a little bit. I would love to see him at safety, outside at certain spots. Like, I think that you can use Clarence Lewis in particular spots so that he can be an effective player of the secondary. I just question what the overall upside is to having him as a full-time starting outside corner. That's all my concerns come to.
Here we go. It says, Go Irish says, I'm feeling greedy this Friday. In your opinion, what are the odds of the Irish pulling off an offensive trifecta of Moore, Tate, and James?
Ryan, you take first crack at that. You're the recruiting guy.
Yeah, the odds, I would say the best odds to the worst odds, I guess. Maybe we'll go there, okay? I would say we're talking about Dante Moore, we're talking about Jason Moore. I guess we're talking
I would imagine Dante.
Okay.
Because he says offensive trifecta.
I would say that it's a pretty close tie between Braylon James and Dante Moore. I think they're both in good position with Notre Dame right now, and then Carnell Tate would be afterwards. If you want to put James at 1A and Moore at 1B, that's fine. Either way, I think that they are both in very good position, and things are trending well for Carnell Tate. It's a neck-and-neck battle with Ohio State, but I think that right now they have a better opportunity to land James and Moore than Tate as it stands.
As far as pulling off the trifecta, I'd say better than 50-50 odds, but I mean, until because see, like, one of these pieces is going to be so important to the other piece. And so until Dante, makes a public commitment to Notre Dame, I'm going to have more skepticism about Carnell Tate. And you all know how I feel about Notre Dame and Dante Moore, but again, and from talking to sources, he has not set a time to make a commitment. And the longer that continues to be the case, the more, because, like, here's the thing. People ask me, who's the number 2 for Dante Moore? And I'm like, there isn't one. I mean, there really isn't a number 2. The problem, however, is that, and I've said this before, is if he does go into the summer and take official visits, there's a more and more and more time for every school to negatively recruit against Notre Dame and, convince him of this and convince him of that. And by then the quarterback sort of carousel of, sorted out, he'll become even more important to other teams then, because he's the last of the big time guys that's on the board. I think Arch will be gone by the summer. Malachi's already off the board. Nico's already off the board. It'll be maybe Dante and Jaden Rashada will be about it. Jackson Arnold's off the board. Vizina will be off the board by then. And so the teams that are kind of, it's like a game of musical quarterbacks, right?
It is, yeah.
When you there's 2 quarterbacks left and 5 people that want to get them. And so, it becomes more concerning. And the longer that plays out, the more challenging it's going to be to get Carnell Tate. So right now I'd say better than 50-50, but not a ton. And the longer it goes with Dante Moore not making a public decision, because let's just say hypothetically that Dante was silent, because people say, well, you say public because it means he's a silent commit. Let's just say hypothetically he was. Okay, I don't care about silent commitments.
It doesn't matter
a whole lot. If he's unwilling to make a public commitment, again, in this hypothetical situation, and he's going to go into the summer, then at that point in time, his silent commitment that he would give, let's say he gives a silent commitment tomorrow, it would mean nothing by June. I mean, because there's a reason he hasn't made it public, because there's clearly something else he's looking for some reason. And I'm not saying that's true. We don't know when he's going to make a decision. And I think Dante is purposely going to play the game to where it's just, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think he wants all that because, so I don't know what he's going to do. I'm just saying hypothetically in that situation, if going back to the original question, it goes in the summer, that's where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to get people to panic and all that kind of stuff. My opinion on Dante Moore has not changed. I'm just trying to, based on previous questions, kind of have a conversation of when I would start getting a little bit concerned.
Yeah. Fair enough. And this is a kind of a loaded question, but we'll see how we go here. Skylar ND says, Brian and Vince, can you explain the difference between pro spread and college spread offense? Brian mentioned yesterday that Clemson runs a college spread and Notre Dame a pro spread.
No, I said Notre Dame runs a pro style offense. I didn't say pro spread. And but I wouldn't say that's necessarily inaccurate. I'm not saying that's inaccurate. Spread essentially is a generic term for essentially an offense that runs a lot of 3 to 4 receiver offenses. I mean, it's turned into a very generic term. It used to mean something more specific. It's kind of like Ryan West Coast now. It used to mean something very specific, and you could trace the lineage, and you knew a West Coast was going to do this, 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 and this. It's not really that way as much anymore. And a spread is essentially, again, you spread them out. Right. But there's no it's not like the air raid, where in the air raid, there's certain principles that every air raid offense is going to do from a throwing standpoint. Right. But in some air raids, you have air raid coaches like Lincoln Riley and Phil Longo who run the ball a ton. Mm-hmm. And you have air raid offenses like Mike Leach that never run the ball. But there's certain principles that they're all going to have. Yeah. When you watch a spread offense like a Clemson and compare it to what Ohio State was pre-Ryan Day, there's a lot of similarities, right? A lot of G scheme, not G scheme, but G counter, a lot of power, a lot of, run game like that, a lot of quarterback runs, a lot of perimeter screens. The concepts are somewhat simple and basic. Pro Ryan Day or post Ryan Day being hired, you see a little bit more of a pro style scheme. Although again, Ohio State's quarterbacks, Ryan, are not asked to do a whole lot from a reading standpoint, but schematically, there's some really intriguing stuff. It's more of a vertical passing game mixed in. And so it's still to me a spread offense in my view. Notre Dame is more of a pro style offense because there's far more complexity to the Notre Dame pass game than there is the Ohio State pass game. The quarterbacks at Notre Dame are asked to do a lot more from a pre and post snap reading standpoint. And so that's really what makes it pro style to me is number one, the type of route combination. It's more of a downfield throwing game. It's more of a pro style run game, inside zone, outside zone, counter, stuff like that. And just what you're asking your quarterback to do. And that's one of the reasons I think that Trevor Lawrence had I think Trevor Lawrence had 2 things working against him as a rookie. Number one, he came from an offense that didn't ask him to do a whole lot mentally. Number 2, he went to a crap organization with a head coach who had no clue what he was doing, right? But you give Trevor Lawrence a good coaching situation, and he'll pick it up quickly, right? But there is a growth period that he was going to need to go from what he was doing from a reading standpoint to the other. One thing that's going to benefit Notre Dame quarterbacks, if they're ever able to develop them properly, is Notre Dame quarterbacks are going to go to the NFL if they have the ability to read a defense, are going to go to the NFL very prepared to read defenses the way that NFL teams ask quarterbacks to read defenses. Would you say that's fair, Ryan? Now, again, if they have that ability, Ian Book just didn't have that ability. There's nothing you can do to fix that. I've said this a million times. And that's why Ryan, it seems pretty obvious that the Saints are already looking to replace Ian Book. I mean, is that an inaccurate? I'm not saying that to take a shot at him. I mean, yeah, we're hearing it. We heard they tried to trade him last year during camp, right? And then he has his one start, and now there's all these rumors about the trades they're making or to try to get a quarterback. Okay, well, there's a reason because they're seeing what we always knew, which is the kid can't read a defense, just can't. But that's not a Notre Dame problem. That's an Ian Book problem. Notre Dame, I think, actually does one of the better jobs in the country with Tommy Rees of really preparing guys mentally to go play. That's why you're seeing think about this. Notre Dame had 3 guys that were either undrafted or 7th-round picks play a lot in the NFL last year on offense. Tommy Kramer, Brock Wright, and Ben Skoranek. And a part of that is because mentally these guys showed up ready to play in an NFL offense.
Sure.
That's what I believe to be true.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it perfectly. And I mean, a quick note, I guess, to the Ohio State side of things, which you say is more of a college-based spread, even though it obviously is getting a little more complex under Ryan Day.
Right.
I mean, the running trend on Ohio State quarterbacks, it's not a athleticism and talent deficiency at Ohio State at quarterback position. The fact of the matter is that there is a huge crash course going from the Ohio State offense to an NFL style offense. It just is. And doesn't mean that none of them can be successful, because I do think that Justin Fields can be successful if the Chicago Bears get a good team around him. Like, I do think that that's possible. But I mean, if I had $1 for every time I watched Ohio State film and I saw a mesh sit, like, that's all they run is mesh. Like, it's insane. Like, they're trying to, and hey, it works for them for the most part, because they are just trying to manipulate space, because they have guys like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like, they have dudes obviously out there. So they're just trying to get their guys the ball in space. I mean, you can't doubt them for doing it, but there is a little bit of a learning curve from how they attack a defense comparative to what you're going to be doing on the NFL level. So that certainly is a more like just college versus pro style. It's just, you're basically just talking about complexity at the end of the day.
Right.
That's what it comes down to.
And I think there are some concepts that need to be a certain way. So Vince, you got to run. I thought you had till 2:30 today.
A little bit. I have to get my stuff ready, but yeah, I mean, I have to leave the house at 2:30.
Okay.
But here we go. I like this one, and I think this one's going to be very interesting. Demetrius Rex says, would you rather have Jack Cohn for another year with this improved offensive line, or have the QB situation be what it is this year?
Vince, since you got to run after this, why don't you go ahead and start and give
this is
intriguing. You clearly have some on your mind, because that's why you liked the question.
Yeah, this is intriguing to me, because I would have loved to see Jack Cohn under a Harry Hiestand coached offensive line, because we did see what he could do towards the end of the season behind a average to better than average offensive line, and he was really good, in my opinion, right? I think he did really, really well in the second half of the season. And we can talk about the level of play and all of that, and I get all of that. But I think Jack Cohn's a good quarterback. Mm-hmm. And I think behind a really good offensive line, which is what I believe that this offensive line will be this year, and what I believe last year's could have been if they were coached properly, I think Jack Cohn could take off. Now, it's a completely different offense with the quarterback situation that they're going to have this year. So I guess it boils down to, what offense would I rather have, I suppose. The one that I think that is going to, a Tyler Buchner-led offense or a Jack Cohn-led offense, because those are two different things, right? Mm-hmm. As much as I would love to see Jack Cohn get an opportunity behind a really good offensive line, it's still a more dynamic offense with Tyler Buchner behind, as the starting quarterback. Now, as a first-year starter, is it going to be? I'm not 100% sure. I think it could be. I think it has the ability to be. But I really would have loved to see Jack Cohn just spreading the ball out to all of the weapons that are going to be on this team. I think that would have been so much fun to watch.
Ryan, you want to take a crack at this one?
Yeah, I mean, I simply just think that the upside's higher with a Buchner if he ends up being the starting quarterback than Jack Cohn. That's pretty much as simple as it gets to me. If Notre Dame is trying to take that push to being a championship level team, I just want to go for the higher upside. It's no slight against Jack Cohn. I think Jack Cohn's a good quarterback, and selfishly, like Vince kind of said, I would like to see what Jack Cohn can look like with a better stability around him from an offensive line perspective. Like, no doubt about it. But I just think that the upside's higher with Buchner, so I would just defer to Buchner in that sense.
You know what's interesting, Ryan, is I feel like if Jack was able to come back, and let's just say they were like, hey, Jack, it's your team, I think he'd have a great year. I think Notre Dame would be very good, and I think Jack could have a chance to be drafted higher next year in a better quarterback class than he will this year in a bad quarterback class. For Jack, it would have been awesome.
Yes.
And Ryan, I somewhat agree with you, but that where I was kind of going is it's not just about 2022 for me. I want to get Tyler Buchner his opportunity to develop as a quarterback. And do I think Notre Dame would have a better chance at beating Ohio State with Jack Cohn? Yes. To Ryan's point, in the opener, yes. Do I think Notre Dame will have a better chance at winning a national championship in December and January with Tyler Buchner? Yes. Right? And so if Jack came back, that means at some point in time during the season, there'd have to be a takeover, and I wouldn't want that for Jack. So, let's just say Tyler Buchner was not in the equation, and it was about Jack. Oh, I would love to see it. I think, Vince, we would all agree that Jack would have a heck of a year.
I agree.
Behind this offensive line with these weapons. I mean, Lorenzo as a sophomore and Lindsey finally with some coaching and all. He'd have a great year. And I could see Jack sneaking into, late day 2, early day 3 next year. It's just that for the team and the program, not just now, but in the future, it's time. It's time to see what Tyler Buchner can do. And I'm not saying you can't beat Ohio State with Tyler Buchner. I just would feel way better about it because I think Jack would absolutely shred that Ohio State secondary.
I think so too.
I think Tyler. I think they can run on Ohio State. I don't know if they're going to be able to throw on Ohio State the way that in game 1, the way that they could with Jack a quarterback. That's where I'm coming from. So, I think Jack would have a monster day against Ohio State.
I do too. I think he would have. I think he would have. I don't want to call it a coming out party, but I think a lot of people were sleeping on how good Jack Cohn could be, and I think.
Well, and I understand why.
I get it too. I'm just saying. I think he would have a banner day against Ohio State. I really do feel that way. So, I like Jack Cohn. What can I say? I think he would.
Well, and the kid's a great kid and great family and all that, and I get it. But I think just at the end of the day, if it was just about Jack, I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
But for the present and future of the program, it's time to see what Tyler Buchner can do. And that's why I'm glad we don't have to make that decision. You don't have to say no to Jack. He didn't have the option.
Yeah, he didn't have that option. Right. And so, I think he's going to have success wherever he goes. You know what I mean? I think he could make pretty good living in the NFL. I do think that. I think he can make a real good living.
I think this, even like a late day 2, early day 3 pick next year, whether I'm right or wrong about that, it's he's still a marginal NFL starter or most likely a backup.
Absolutely.
Just based on physical tools. But there's value to that. I mean, you can still be a 3rd, 4th round pick with that type of projection. I just think there'd have been a lot more confidence. And I think he would have been another full year removed from the injury and all that kind of stuff. And then, and I think another year in Tommy Reese's offense would have done him some good. But
absolutely.
I just, again, it's time to see what Tyler Buchner can do. It's just time. Michael Keeley with the question here. If Estime and Diggs have big jumps, and could Tyree play more wide receiver? He is dangerous in the slot and also will likely translate to his draft stock in the future. This could assist the wide receiver depth issues. I just want to say something like that. Where have we seen Chris Tyree be dangerous in the slot? I don't think we've ever seen it. He's never caught a pass in a game from the slot, ever. All his big plays last year were out of the backfield. So I don't know where that comes from.
Yep.
But beyond that, Ryan, I'll let you kind of answer this question because my answer is just no.
Yeah, no, it's a no for me too, because to your point, I think that the best option that you have with Chris Tyree being a mismatch, because he could be a mismatch to a degree in the slot, maybe if it's against a safety or a linebacker, but coming out of the backfield on an option route, an angle route, a wheel route, something like that, where you can isolate him against a linebacker or second level defender. I think that's where the biggest mismatch comes from. So I don't see Chris Tyree just playing wide receiver just in general. He's a running back. You can use him out of the backfield and in the passing game as a weapon, as a running back. You don't need to move him to wide receiver for him to make an impact in the passing game. So I see this, in theory, hopefully, being a 3-headed monster, because I think all 3 of those young men have outstanding talents, and they're all extremely different types of backs. So I think ideally, if Estime and Diggs take big steps and Chris Tyree is able to stay healthy and durable, then you're talking about a 3-headed monster that rivals the best in college football, in my opinion.
I agree. I think you can use them all. I don't think it's. I think there's an unfair assumption that Chris Tyree won't be the number 1 guy. But I also think there's a misguided assumption that Chris Tyree can be a receiver. I don't see that in his game. I think he's a really good pass catcher as a running back. He's not Kyron Williams. Kyron Williams could have done that. Kyron Williams could have been a slot receiver in college, I believe. in the Clemson offense, we were talking about Clemson spread offense. In the Clemson offense, Chris Tyree would have been Kyron Williams would have been a really good slot receiver because that's what he did for a lot of his career. That's not Chris Tyree's game. And so, and I definitely don't see him as a receiver in the NFL. I'd see him as maybe a pass catching back in the NFL, but that's going to be out of the backfield, not as a runner. There's a lot more that goes into being a receiver than just being his size and being fast. And I just don't see him as having those traits. Freeman's Pecs, as a coach, what type of kid and student athlete do you find is the most difficult to coach on the field and connect with off the field? What type of kids are the hardest to reach? It's kind of simple for me, Ryan. It's kids that think they have all the answers.
True.
I mean, it's really that simple. I mean, I've connected with kids who come from privilege. I've connected with kids who come from nothing. I've connected with kids who are white, kids who are black, kids who are Hispanic. And I've had problems connecting with kids of all those different things too. It usually the thing is that you have a hard time is kids who like, and as far as when it's the kid's fault, it's because they think they have all the answers. As a coach, when it's your fault, a lot of times it's because you're unwilling to see why a player may be guarded, why he may be, have walls up. I had a kid who just he wasn't real coachable at first when I got there. Then the more you get to know him, you meet his mom, you talk to people about him, and you realize, he had in his life, male authority figures, especially ones that look like me, hadn't really done right by him, right? So as a young man, he sees me, and I'm just the next in line of people like that. I had to break down that wall before I could get him to realize, like, look, here's why I'm saying what I'm saying and doing what I'm doing. But if I didn't care enough to look into why is this kid not listening to me, then I just would have said he's a punk who doesn't want to be coached, right? So that's when it's the coach's fault, when you're unwilling to see why. But sometimes kids are just pricks. I mean, sometimes they just think they know it all. There's no good reason for it. They're pricks. You know what I mean? And that's the reality. But you've got to do your due diligence as a coach to try to, is this kid just disrespectful, or, just because he's just that kind of kid, or is that a protection mechanism for him to not let himself get screwed over again? Or, it's like people ask, like, what are the type of people that have the hardest time, talking to me about God? And it's usually people that have had really rough parental situations, especially with a father. Because when you compare God to a father, and then your dad's is abusive, drunk, and awful person, it's like, well, I don't want a dad. I had one, and he was terrible. And it's the same thing here. You've got to be able to learn to get to know why they are the way they are. But the kids that are hardest to reach are the ones who just, in my opinion, think they have all the answers. So that's my little bit of a long-winded answer, Ryan.
Yeah.
You see, and I was a college coach. You were a high school coach, so it's different. I'd be really curious to kind of see what it was like for you, because you're recruiting a more regionalized area. I was, it's a little bit different, and I think makes for a unique answer. So I'd be curious to hear what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of experiences I've had, not only as just a coach, but from my teaching background as well. I think the biggest thing that's always kind of stuck with me about forging those relationships is empathy, because you don't truly understand what someone's going through until you try to actually understand, right? Because you can only kind of parlay off of your experiences until someone is able to kind of give you a peek under the blinds a little bit to what they're experiencing. So the toughest part, and I would agree with Brian, is when players won't budge, right? When students just won't budge. And that could be for a lot of different reasons. That wall could be up, and that's fine. If the wall's up, I could break through it eventually, and I'll keep hammering away until I eventually do break through it. But the only time that you have real trouble reaching someone is, to your point, is when they think they know everything. When they
get through the wall and you're like, oh no, that's the same. It wasn't the wall.
There's a safe behind that wall now, and you don't have the tools to get into that safe. Like it's very frustrating too, because I mean, you always try to reach those types of kids, but for whatever reason, they just have blinders on, it seems like, and they just. And a lot of times it's because of upbringing. It is. I mean, honestly, you kind of portray yourself, the way your parents kind of brought you up in most cases. That's not always the same, but yeah, it's always difficult when a kid just will not take criticism because they just don't think they did anything wrong. If you don't think you did anything wrong, there's no reason to change.
Right. Right. Or there's some reason why they don't have to listen to you.
Right.
And it's like, okay. But it's always your job as a coach or teacher and I didn't even think about the teacher angle, Ryan. That also adds a really interesting deal too. But it's your job to find out why that's the case. And then at some point in time, you just realize, okay, this kid doesn't want to be coached, so I'm not gonna. But if you're not going to take coaching, you know what else you're not going to do? Play. So, I mean, that was always my go-to. Like, okay, cool. You don't have to do what I'm going to tell you to do, but that's fine. I'm only going to play people that will, And yes, I think the other thing too is with young people is you have to be willing. This is something I like about Marcus Freeman. You have to do what the coaches are telling you to do. But one thing he's told his coaches is, but don't be afraid to explain to them why you're asking them to do it that way. That should always be true. I never understood coaches like, why do you do this? Because I said so. There comes a point in time, Ryan, where that's the answer. I've explained it to you. You just don't want to listen. So do it because I said so. You know what I mean?
I mean, that happens in teaching too, honestly. I mean, I want kids to ask why they need to know something because I feel like for a lot of time, growing up when I was in their shoes, it was like a teacher would just say, because this is how I was taught. And it's just like, that's not an answer. That's not an answer. That's just you. That's basically you being spiteful because you had to go through some things and you had to now take it back on.
Or your job is simply to get me to this is the problem with teaching to tests when the end game is just to pass a test. You're not actually teaching them anything. You're getting them to memorize a certain formula just in order to pass the test, and then they don't need to retain it afterwards. If you truly want to get kids to learn, learning to me is a more long-term thing. It becomes applicable when you've learned something as opposed to just memorize something. Right. And that's what I always found. Teachers that would give me that, it was either because that's just what they knew or because they didn't really care about me learning. They just wanted me to memorize it so I would be able to regurgitate on the test, and they could go to their bosses and say, look at the test scores, give me a raise, So It is what it is. Happy Friday, IB Nation. Rob, thank you so much. We have some comments to Brian Kelly. Not only is BK making excuses on why he couldn't win the big one, he's kind of dragging Notre Dame through the dirt and basically saying he had to work with too much. And that was kind of part of the reason, Ryan or Chris, that we felt that article was needed to be said. Because I sent it to Ryan first too. I was like, okay, is this enough? Did I hammer him enough? Is it too much? And Ryan was like, go, hit send. So, oh, goodness gracious, that guy. All right. Jeff Fluke says, since you love the hot dog question, what are there more of in the world, wheels or doors?
Wheels. Has to be a wheel, right?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on, there's certain parts of the world where there are no really wheels or not many. The only wheels are like on a wheelbarrow. I mean, there's parts of the world where you don't have cars and then, maybe like 3 cars in an entire village. I mean,
but there may still be bikes and scooters.
Right, but that's like 2. And so, you think so. That's a good question. I would want to know the answer to that one.
I'd say wheels. That's my answer.
Yeah. That's a good
question.
Because
even like toys, like Hot Wheels and
if you're going to like that,
Oh, they're wheels. They're wheels.
No, I agree. I agree. He didn't say what kind of wheels. That's a good question. Good question. Rob Osgood. Hey guys, I'm in North Carolina, and I know Notre Dame is recruited well here before, but seems like they have increased their recruiting down my way, especially with the O linemen. 3 games here in North Carolina in the next 2 years as well. Thanks. Yeah, Rob. I mean, I think the 3 offensive linemen in the Carolinas this year is just more of a coincidence. It just happens that there are some good linemen that they're going after. I think the Carolinas have been an important part for Notre Dame for several years now. And sometimes they don't have success there. Sometimes they do, but they've always gone there, in my opinion. And I do think that ramping that up would be a smart thing because the Carolinas, Ryan, produces a lot of good football players. And sometimes guys that don't get the recognition that they maybe should and don't get recruited as heavily, but man, there's some good football players. And that's what we talked about yesterday, the DMV. And you had made a comment afterwards, like, and you need to extend that a little bit down to the Carolinas as well. It's that mid-Atlantic, which is the DMV plus the Carolinas, is incredibly important for Notre Dame.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, Rob, just to hit on a couple guys, obviously you're talking about the offensive line class for 2023, potentially guys that Notre Dame is looking at. Monroe Freeling's the big one, obviously out of South Carolina. You also have Sam Pendleton, who's a recent offer from Notre Dame a couple weeks ago, who is already visiting campus this weekend in Notre Dame. So obviously that is ramped up very quickly. And then Sullivan Absher is another guy that Notre Dame has a high opinion of and hopes that lands him hopefully sometime in the near future, if possible. It's going to be a Clemson battle for Sullivan, and it seems also for Monroe, which makes total sense with his proximity to home.
And Absher has a final three of Notre Dame, Clemson, and NC State, but most people I talk to, it's really going to come down to Notre Dame or Clemson is what it sounds like. So
yeah,
we'll see, and that's why the visits, they're both expected on campus. Sam Pendleton's on campus now, I believe, right? Isn't he on campus today?
Yep.
And then obviously Absher and Freeling will be on campus again for the 23rd. And I think it's interesting that Freeling and Absher, it's not that they visited together, but both times they visit will be the same weekend. Yeah, they were both on campus the 29th. So I don't think that's planned. I just think it's interesting that that's the way that it goes. D-Rock, good afternoon, everyone. Great article, Brian. Way to tell it like it is. You are welcome. Leopard Irons, I think it's a great name. Brian, how fired up were you when you wrote your BK article yesterday? Actually, not a ton. And that's partly why it took me so long to get started. I had to kind of because if I would have just wrote what I immediately felt and hit send, it would have looked way different. And it would have been unprofessional, to be honest with you. Because I think Ryan will tell you, if I said publicly the things I feel about Brian Kelly without the thoughtful process of putting together an article that represents what we believe in at Irish Breakdown, it would not be an article that represents what we believe in at Irish Breakdown. It would be very raw, and try not to do things like that. But I would say I was still jazzed up. I was still the rebuttal needed to be said. I was pissed off, but I wasn't like the fired up I was when I first read the article, because I sent it to Ryan and Sean right away when I was pretty pissed, because again, it's one thing to take shots at Jack Swarbrick. Jack Swarbrick's a very wealthy man. Jack Swarbrick can handle it. He doesn't need me to defend him, although I did a little bit. And even the training table thing it's petty. It's typical BS stuff from Kelly. The thing that really got me was the stuff about the players. And there was a couple comments, and it's because when you talk about recruiting, you're talking about the players. When you say we have to shop down a different aisle the way Brian Kelly does, that's a shot at the players on your team. You're saying I can't go get the best. That's what he's doing. And those are really the things behind it. It was one thing to take a shot at Notre Dame, and that pissed me off, but it wasn't reaction worthy. It was when he started to kind of get into the player aspect of it that I looked at and was like, okay, this clown needs to be responded to. And that's, I don't know. What were your thoughts on that, Ryan? Did you feel like a rebuttal needed to be made when I first sent that to you?
I mean, yeah. I mean, it was, especially when you told me that, it was some former players that had quarrels with it too, right? Because, I mean, some guys just don't have the platform to, push back against it, right? So, I mean, somebody needs to do it, right? It's something where you're in a situation where you can push back against it, and it needs to be said. If it's, I mean, at the end of the day, man, a coach needs to protect his players. And if you throw guys under the bus like that, you don't deserve any proper shit. You deserve what you get at that point.
Right. Yep.
And apparently Toaster Oven said that it is Wheels. Wheels is the answer, by the way.
Okay.
So, there you go.
All right. That's interesting. I never realized that was somebody actually did a study on that. It's very interesting. He made a compelling argument. Domer Grizz asks, do recruits ever fall in love with the process? It must feel great to get standing ovations and sit on gold thrones. Makes sense a recruit would want that to end and would keep taking visits. Some kids do. Yeah, some kids don't like that stuff. And part of a good recruiting operation is knowing the difference, is knowing when to look at a kid and say, hey, look, for example, you look at a kid like Charles Jagasol. I don't think you're going to treat him the same way you might have a Cardinal Tate or Dante Moore, because I don't think that's really something that will click with him. So some kids, fall in love with the process. There's no doubt about it. And Notre Dame's success with those type of kids has not been great. I don't think Dante is dragging out his recruitment because he likes getting standing ovations and sitting on gold thrones. I think Dante's a very thoughtful young man that wants to make the right decision once. And if he's not willing to make a commitment to Notre Dame, in the near future, then that will tell me that, maybe he's not as sold on Notre Dame as I think he is and keep hearing he is. So certainly some kids love the process, and that's why some kids wait. Not every kid that commits in December or January or for February are kids that love the process. It's all circumstances, but there's a lot to do. They want the official visits, but they want the pomp and circumstance. They want the hype. They want to be on TV. There's definitely some kids like that, but it's every kid. Some kids hate it. Some kids absolutely hate it. So it just depends on who we're talking about. Mace AK, Brian's article is the primary reason why I'm an IB member. There is no BS with IB Nation. I appreciate that very, very much, Mace AK. And we do appreciate that you are part of our community. No doubt about it. MT41, B. Ryan, who do you think will be the schools to beat in Samson Okunlola's recruitment?
A couple schools. I mean, it's so difficult to predict because Samson's a very hard person to kind of read a little bit, but I would say Penn State, Ohio State, Georgia are the ones that pop out to me as a few. Because, I mean, right now, Samson has said that he wants to get back to Notre Dame, but that has still not been scheduled.
Right.
So, yeah.
He's scheduled one to Michigan, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so
Michigan State,
It's not like he hasn't visited places. So that's certainly concerning to me. Certainly concerning. Kenny Moore says, do you think the wide receiver position has become the second most important position in football? I assume behind quarterbacks. No, it is not. It is on offense a distant third, in my opinion. I don't think you need great receivers to have a great offense. I don't. If you've got the right trigger man and the right offensive lineman, you can have good receivers that you can turn into a great unit, in my opinion, Ryan. Now, if you have all three, great. And that doesn't mean you can't have a great offense when your receivers are your second best part, because I would say that's true of Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Clemson in 2018, their offensive line was probably their fourth best position group.
That's fair.
But that's because they were special at those other positions. I mean, they had first-round picks across the board, basically, at those positions, and had a pretty darn good freaking defense that year. If Clemson, let's be honest, because they had a lot of, as great as that team was, because this is kind of what's funny, Ryan. I've heard a lot of people say, like, that Clemson team was one of the greatest teams I've ever seen, and it was a really good team and probably the best Clemson team that I've seen. But that Clemson team also had some flaws. I mean, it wasn't a perfect team. It wasn't in the same league as, like, I would say, like LSU 2019. And if you look through the season, they had several scares. I mean, because we're talking about the 2018 team, they barely beat Texas A&M on the road, 28-26. They barely beat Syracuse. Had to have, Chase Bryce come off the bench to win that game. They looked sloppy against Boston College in a 27-20 win. And, obviously then they get to the postseason and they look great, right? Like they had a dominant ACC title game victory, had a convincing victory over a really good Notre Dame team, and then blew out Alabama. But that same team almost lost to Syracuse and should have lost to Syracuse. That same team almost lost to Texas A&M. And my point is, if you didn't have the defense that you had that year, then they don't win those games. And part of it is because it took a while for that offensive line to find its footing. Right. So I think the offensive line was part of the reason that Clemson took a while to really get going. So I still view it as the most important thing. And the other thing I'd say, Ryan, too, is part of it depends on who are we talking about? What team are we talking about? Because I still feel like what you do schematically is still going to kind of have an impact on which positions are most important to your football team, So
that's a fair point. I would say not only that, I don't even think it's the second best position on the offensive side of the football, but if you take the defense into account, I definitely don't think it's the second most important position. Because, I mean, for me, the two most important positions in football are quarterback, obviously, most important position in sports in general. And then I think defensive ends or your outside pass rushers, whatever you want to coin those guys as, the ability at quarterback and to affect quarterbacks are the most important thing in my opinion. So I would even say right after that, offensive tackles are after defensive ends, in my opinion, because those are the guys that protect your quarterback and facing off against the best athletes at defensive end. So I would say wide receivers are somewhere in the cornerback type of conversation, in my opinion, but you make a fair point that also does depend on how your team is built and what team we're talking about. But I would say no to the question.
John A1, do wide hashes on a football field aid in the development of players? I would say no, they don't aid in the development of players. I think what they do is they allow players who don't have the physical development of older players to have success. Like a player, a quarterback in high school, most, and we're not talking about the Dante Moores, we're talking about just most high school quarterbacks are going to have a tough time throwing an outcut into the boundary from a NFL hash. Because in the NFL, there really isn't really a true boundary, right? Because the hashes are so narrow. In college, there is a true boundary, but it's still a further throw. And, so yeah, I think that's it aids in allowing players who maybe aren't as talented to be effective with certain things, but I don't think it has anything to do with development, in my opinion, Ryan. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
I've never even thought about it, to be honest, John. I mean, not really. I don't really have. I mean, like Brian went a little more in depth about it. I guess there's some positives and negatives to it, but like overall, I've never thought that like, wow, that's a clear advantage or a clear help in any way. Like, I don't think it matters much.
I definitely think it matters when you talk about coaching just a normal high school or football team.
Sure.
Right? I mean, it's gonna have an impact on the things that you do and don't do, for sure. Kenneth James says, I think some recruits' parents have fallen in love with the process and the attention in certain situations. I would argue, Ryan, that in the last few years especially, I've met more parents that fall in love with recruiting than I have players.
Yeah, I mean,
I know you're still kind of new to this. It's
right.
but yeah, especially when you look at it from a national standpoint, I would say there's a lot of parents that fall in love with the process.
There's a lot of helicopter parents out there, man. There's no doubt about it. So yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of parents too that live through what their children are accomplishing, right? And I mean, you always say like, I mean, that's always a theme in like movies or like TV shows and stuff, but like it is true though. Like it makes, and I mean, there's a difference between being proud and then living vicariously through someone, right? Like you can be very proud of your son for getting a scholarship offer to Notre Dame, but that doesn't mean that you got the scholarship offer to Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Like there's a clear distinction there. So yes, helicopter parents are absolutely a thing. Those types of parents do exist, Kenneth. I agree 100%.
Yep. Domer Grizz says, do recruits get offended when services drop their ranking after they commit to Notre Dame? Can you think of anyone who might actually have decommitted because of that? Maybe keep visits to keep ranking up. I don't know of anyone that's done the latter. I don't know of anyone that's decommitted because of their ranking. I don't. Look, Domer Grizz, anytime you ask a question like the first one, it's a very fair question, but the answer is always going to be some do, some don't. I mean, it's when you're dealing with as many kids as we talk to, Ryan, you can attest to this. There's some kids who, when their ranking gets dropped, it ticks them off, and it's like, a motivation to go do something different. And others are like, I don't care. Like, I didn't even know where I was ranked, so why would I care if they move me up or down? But you see kids all the time tweeting like, thanks to so-and-so for ranking me as a 4-star. Some of those kids really care about that stuff.
Sure.
And I get it to a degree. I probably would have to a degree when I was younger, because it's kind of like it's recognition for all the hard work you're putting in. But really caring much beyond that, I don't think I would have. But some kids do. Some kids are really obsessed by that. And some kids do things in order to do that. I do. But I don't know of a kid that's ever, maybe it's happened, but I don't know of who that person would be.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, because players drop in rankings all the time. I know we associate it with Notre Dame, obviously, because we've seen it happen. But I don't think that that's going to spurn your college interest just because of a recruiting, downfall or whatever. But yes, I would agree though that the first part of the question is that there are kids that absolutely care about their recruiting ranking. There's no doubt about it. And when something goes bad, they're not happy. They're not happy about it.
Okay, let's get to the next question from John A1. He asks, how would IB redo the 23 schedule? Who would be the ideal 2012-23 opponents? John, I don't dislike the 2023 schedule a ton beyond because part of it is I don't know what the entire schedule is going to look like. We now know the 12 teams, but we don't know when they're going to play Duke, Louisville, NC State, or Pitt. Like those dates have not been established yet. I would have had a better week 2 opponent than Tennessee State because I like the notion of you've got Ohio State in game 4. Now, one thing that I liked is they talked about having a bye that week. And Jack Swarbrick, one of the few things that they discussed in that press conference that I thought was smart for Notre Dame, he said, Coach Freeman had noted that he doesn't really like the idea of having a bye that early, which I completely agree with. I'm a believer. I would never really want to bye before week 5. And at the earliest, week 4 would be one that I could be somewhat okay with. Because usually you had all fall camp, all summer, all fall camp, then the first 3 games. It's a decent time for a bye. But I prefer buys to be like in week 5 to 7 is like my ideal. Not necessarily half point, but I do like one kind of earlier because then you got 4 or 5 games under your belt to kind of here's who we are, what do we need to work on, that kind of stuff. So I like the idea that they didn't do a bye in week 2. That was smart. But I like the notion of not a good opponent in week 1, good opponent in week 2, not a good opponent in week 3, good opponent in week 4. I feel like that is sort of, for me, the way that Notre Dame needs to go about it. Now, Tennessee State, now you have Navy, Tennessee State, and Central Michigan. You don't really have anyone to kind of gauge there in week 2 where you've developed in weeks 1, through fall camp in week 1, because Navy's such a different animal, and you're going to be so much better than Tennessee State and Central Michigan that I don't think either one of those teams are good enough to kind of point out, or to cause you to see some of the flaws you may have, right? And that's the thing I like. And I'm not saying a week 2 opponent should have been like a Georgia, but give me a TCU, right? Give me a team like that that's a good team but not a great team where we gotta, we're gonna beat them and probably beat them somewhat soundly as looking at it from a coach's standpoint. But they're also still good enough, Ryan, to kind of say, hey, look, they kept doing this one blitz and our protection wasn't picking it up. And, or they had this really good receiver that, was giving us some problems against this coverage. So that's kind of how I like it. So, you talk about Tennessee State. Would I have wanted to play Tennessee that week? Probably not. Would I have wanted to, but maybe I wouldn't be too opposed to that. But, that's a kind of, I don't think playing like a Ball State, you've already got your MAC team on the schedule. You've already got them. It's Central Michigan the next week. I would have wanted to see a Power 5 team in Indiana, not a Minnesota because I can't stand Minnesota, but like if you could have, you play Pitt next that year. If I knew that the Pitt game was going to be week 2, that would have been okay with me. Some team that you feel like can give you an early season test, then you can kind of work out the kinks the next week against Central Michigan. Then you're ready for Ohio State, and then you're ready to rock and roll.
What's your thing against Minnesota, Brian? I've never heard this.
I just have no desire. I don't think playing Minnesota just does anything for Notre Dame, especially now that PJ Fleck is there. I just can't stand that guy. So
you're not rowing the boat, huh?
No, and I have no clue what that had to do with being at Western Michigan or at Minnesota or whatever else. But yeah, I'm not rowing the boat at all. I'm hard pass on that guy. Sprinting. No, let me sprint down the field. Whatever. But yeah, not a PJ Fleck fan. Did you
like the Schiano chopping wood when he was at Rutgers? Was that better?
That was lame too. It's like this. Like I always like those things like fall. I'm like waiting on him to like sprint and like trip and But like, remember when Eastern Michigan tried to do that thing with like the brick wall?
Oh yeah.
And they're like stumbling over. I was like, that's so appropriate for such a stupid gimmick. Just run out of the freaking tunnel and go play football. You know what I mean? Like just chopping wood. It's like, okay, whatever, dude. Like you're trying too hard, man. You're trying way too hard. So yeah, not a big fan, Ryan, at all. What are your thoughts on that scheduling aspect? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, the Tennessee State one is obviously one, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole since we talked about it yesterday. But what's it? Week 2, you said, right? Is the Tennessee State game? So, Yeah, I mean, as long as the Notre Dame schedule for me is diverse in the sense that we're touching all different areas, because that's, again, same on the recruiting side of everything, right? Like, it's a national brand, it's a national schedule. I want to kind of touch every region type of thing, because, I mean, that's better than word of mouth, right? Is kind of seeing it firsthand. So that's just, for me, the balance is what I kind of strive for from a schedule perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me see here. We'll get down to some more questions. Domer Grizz, would Kevin Austin have been a 6-star recruit if Stuckey and company had been able to convince him to stay, especially given our depth concerns, or will Colsey make us say Kevin who? I'd say no and no right now. I mean, Kevin would have been really good. He wasn't going to be Michael Floyd. He wasn't going to be Golden Tate 2009. Mm-hmm. He wasn't going to be that. He would have been really good.
Maybe like Chase Claypool-ish.
Yeah, right. Like, we're again late. Like, my argument was like, I think he could have been like a late first round pick, right? But I don't think Kevin is like this elite, like, wow. Like, he's not going to come back and be a Devontae Smith or, you know, some of those guys that have just had like, oh my gosh, that guy took a game over. I mean, he would have done that at times, but I don't think he would have been that. I think he'd been very good.
Yeah.
But no, not quite that level. And can Deion Colsey make us say Kevin who? I mean, I get where you're coming from. I don't love those kind of things because you should never forget the guy that came before who laid the foundation for the guy that's coming next. But I understand what you're trying to say. You're not really saying that. Could he be that guy? Sure. Will he be that guy? Way too early. He has a lot to prove for me for that. But he's going to have to get ready because, you know, the guy that you were thinking could maybe take some of those reps, Joe Wilkins, is not healthy now, and we don't know when he's going to be. So certainly some question marks at the receiver position, Ryan. No question about it.
Yeah. I don't like the 1-for-1 either. Now I'm optimistic about what Deion Colsey can be, but I also think that the offense is just going to run a little bit differently looking forward. So I don't think it's a direct, like, hey, the W position has to be the top position on the team type of thing. Like, I think that the offense is just changing a little bit where it doesn't have to be a 1-for-1. Can someone replace Kevin Austin? I think the production can get replaced in different ways.
I think it could also get replaced by Michael Mayer. And I mean that as a W. I think that's the other thing too, is we could see some stuff where maybe you put your 3 receivers to the field, put Michael Mayer to the boundary, especially if you decide to go with your fast lineup, which I would expect Notre Dame to do, where, you know, we see Lorenzo Styles in the boundary times this year. You're going to do different stuff with right. And you're going to see different stuff. You're not going to do the same things you did with Kevin Austin or you would do with the Deion Colsey. The nice thing about that alignment is on one snap, you can put Lorenzo Styles into the boundary. And in the very next snap, you can have Lorenzo to the field and have Michael Mayer in the boundary. There's a lot of different things you can do from that. And you know, look, we haven't seen the offense be run to the field with the pass game a lot, Ryan, and with the X and Z's, but we've seen it. I mean, that's what happened when Will Fuller was at Notre Dame. He was an X. He was the field outside guy. So we have seen it, and I don't have a problem with it. And honestly, I wish they would get away from, you know, just be more balanced. I think that's required. They need more balance from the receiver position, in my opinion. And even when they had, you know, Chase Claypool to the field, you know, he had good production in 2018. You know, 50 catches, 639 yards, but it was always kind of like it was always complimentary production. And I would like to see them get away from that. To your point, Ryan, where not that you're flipping it and you're becoming pro field, but just be more flip and balance, period. You know, I think that's something I would like to see. And that's what I like about the RPO offense, because you're going to see more of that. I mean, we saw in the bowl game against Oklahoma State. I mean, you know, Kevin Austin obviously had really good numbers. And I'm going to pull up the stats here. But I mean, Kevin Austin had really good numbers in that game, but you saw Michael Mayer had 7 catches. Lorenzo Styles had over 100 yards. I think he had 8 catches, right? So your field guy had 8 catches that game because of why? Yeah, probably half of those throws were RPOs, if not more. You know, and then you hit like a wheel route to him. You know, you put him in motion and hit a wheel route. But you had 7 catches for Braden Lindsey, you know, on RPOs, 7 catches for 60 yards. 7 catches for Michael Mayer, 6 for Austin, 6 for Tyree, and 8 for Styles. So your field had a lot more production in that game than you're used to. And I think that's something that the RPO screen game can do, right? Is that's a really good way to get more production to your field guys. because it is a little harder to hit some of those field throws, because it's like kind of the hash we talked about. Like if you're on the left hash and your X, you don't have many quarterbacks that are banging a 15-yard out cut to their X in a traditional 2x1 or 3x1 formation.
Mm-hmm.
Just there aren't a lot of quarterbacks that can physically make that throw. So it limits where you can bound. If you have a quarterback that can't bang a boundary 15-yard out, then you need to find a new quarterback. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so there's less you can do in regards to some of the things you can do to W, but there's also more things you can do when it comes to the screen game, more things kind of getting some of the over the top that meshes. I think that's one thing Ohio State does a great job of. They have a lot of different ways they can get their field receivers the football. Mm-hmm. In the quickens, in like you said, a lot of mesh stuff. There's a lot of stuff they do that I think Notre Dame did more of in down the stretch than they had done before. That makes me think Ryan could be onto something with. We're going to see a shift where it is either more field oriented or more balanced, one of the two compared to the W. And I would have wanted that to be true, Ryan, even if Kevin Austin did come back.
Yeah, no, I want that shift to happen. Because I think that you have the players that if you're just able to manipulate a little bit of space, and that's, we're talking about running to running the passing offense through the field versus the boundary. You're running it to the field because you just want to create a little bit more space. You have guys like Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey. Those guys, I mean, just even outside of the RPO game for a second, just get those guys the football in space, man. Manipulate a little bit of space, and there's big plays that are going to be created. We saw it in Oklahoma State, what Lorenzo Styles is capable of when he gets the football in his hand. We saw in the practice what Braden Lindsey is able to do when he gets the football in his hand. You've seen it in spurts during his career. So there's athletes Notre Dame has that can take advantage of playing in space a ton. And I think that shift needs to happen a little bit because I don't want us to forget about the W. I want Deion Colsey and whoever else is in that position to have a lot of opportunities. But I also think that you need to be able to take advantage of the athletes that you have to the field. I think that needs to happen moving forward.
Okay, let's go to I have a super chat from Corey D. I wish Notre Dame would fight harder to recapture the vacated wins from 10 years ago. We went from number 2 in wins to 5th and first in winning percentage to 4th. Today might not be the day to make that argument because I think there's going to be a lot of pettiness from fans about, about whether or not you want Brian, because those 21 wins go to Brian Kelly. But no, I agree. At the time, I thought Notre Dame took that too easily. Now, the thing is, Notre Dame has ignored it. They have completely ignored it. So, like, in Notre Dame's standpoint, they still, when they talk about, because the only way that they can say Brian Kelly's the program's all-time winningest coach is because they're counting the 21 wins. Mm-hmm. You take those 21 wins away, Brian Kelly's in the 90s. He's not the all-time winningest coach. So Notre Dame has ignored it. But to Corey's point, in the bigger picture, how it's viewed in college football, it's still recognized as not wins.
Sure.
Which the thing that I find stupid is that they still count the losses. Either a game doesn't count because you had ineligible players, or it does.
Right.
How can you count like a win counts, but a loss? It's just one of the many stupid things. If the wins don't count, the losses shouldn't count. And then that takes care of, a decent chunk of the win percentage thing. Now, it still, goes down a little because you don't have the 12-1 season, but they also went 9-4 the next year and had to sacrifice those. You just added 5 losses to Notre Dame's docket and took away 21 wins. Mm-hmm. That seems kind of stupid. So either the games count or they don't. They should all count or they all shouldn't count. But, obviously, thank you for that super chat, Corey, very, very much. We have another question here from John Klimek. He says, do you think Chancey Stuckey and Tommy Rees will take a more simplified approach, a simplified wide receivers concepts and trees approach in game planning to provide the wide receivers, to bring the wide receivers along faster? Thoughts on that, Ryan?
I don't think it's simplistic wide receiver concepts. I think it's just going back to the fundamentals. Like, that's the biggest thing that we've been talking about from Chancey Stuckey is that you want to see Notre Dame's players work better through press, get in and out of the breaks better, be, just more efficient route runners. You want to see them attack the football better in the air. So it's the little parts of being a wide receiver. I think that it's going to be the point of emphasis, John. I don't think it's necessarily changing the concepts of your offense. Like, I don't think that that's a need because I think you do have some players that have played a lot of football coming back. So I don't think that that's necessarily a necessity in this context. I just think that it's about, let's get back to the fundamentals, man. Like we have to beat press. We have to be better in the air. We have to run better routes. Those are the things I think is going to separate a good wide receiver room to be making them one of the better wide receiver rooms in the country, which I think they can be if everything comes together. So I think it's more about fundamentals than simplifying concepts.
Okay, here we got some more questions here from Patty O'Furniture. It's a great name. If Jabron Paynes joins the 2022 class and we take 2 backs in 2023, isn't that way too many backs in the room?
So, I mean, let's start from the perspective for a second, Patty. So if they do land Jabron Payne, they would still be willing to take 2 backs in 2023. So, let's start there. So for your question is very valid because I think it is a potential reality for Notre Dame. Is it way too many backs in the room?
Not in 2022.
Not in 2022,
right,
no.
It depends on who leaves. If everybody comes back, 7 running backs to me is 1 too many.
That's a lot, yeah.
It's because you don't have enough reps to give them all at that point in time. But yes, it's too many backs. But I think also I would, you always have to also, this is the rub. You have to be prepared for somebody's going to leave. Whether it be a positive leaving where Chris Tyree has a monster year and he goes pro, or someone isn't happy with where they are, and they decide to leave because of that. And look, I hope Logan Diggs never leaves, but Notre Dame would be naive to not be thinking they need to be prepared for that possibility because he played a bunch. You love him. I mean, Tom Reese loves Logan Diggs. You're telling the kid he's going to be part of what you do, and you still have to kind of convince him to come back. And is this going to be a problem again? I mean, that we don't know. I hope not. And I would not. I think some fans take too hard of a stance on Logan Diggs. Like, oh, he's just going to leave if he doesn't get carries. Well, we don't know that. I don't, but yeah, we'll see. But I think 7, Ryan, it's just 1 too many.
That is a lot. I agree.
Yeah. Domer Grizz says, is running back the deepest position on the team right now? If so, who is the deepest? Is wide receiver the thinnest?
I have a take, I guess. I think the deepest is offensive line.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. There's a lot of talent, man.
Deepest from a number standpoint, I would agree. The reason I would still say running back is because pure number standpoint, obviously the offensive line, but I would say the offensive line doesn't have a 4th stringer like Jadarian Price.
That's fair. But I mean, Notre Dame is returning what, eight offensive linemen that have had some sort of started experience.
That doesn't fill out your second team, right? And
that's fair.
Right. No, but that's what makes it difficult to have these conversations comparing the running back depth chart to the offensive line depth chart.
Sure.
Is because it's some positions, like if you have 4 running backs, you're 4 deep. You can't have enough. You should not have enough scholarship linemen to fill out a 4 deep on offensive line. It's too many guys. So that's what makes it hard. But what I would say to your point is, I would say that I would argue that right now the defensive line would be even deeper than the offensive line in regards to guys that not only played but played well. As you look at, because you've got Foskey, Adamiola, those guys, and then you've got plenty of guys on the bench. You've got big ends that have played a bunch. You've got 3-4 D tackles that have played a bunch. You just landed Chris Smith. So it just depends on kind of when you go by deepest, Domer, we'd have to define terms. And to me, that would be, depth of talent. Is it depth of production? Because, running backs are very talented, but the counter to that would be, but how proven are any of those guys really?
True.
Right? Audric Estime has 7 career carries. Logan Diggs hasn't even gotten to 300 total yards yet. He averaged 4.4 yards per carry last year. So there's a ton of counter arguments you can make. Is wide receiver the thinnest as of right now? I would say yes. Yeah. Tight end, you could debate is in there too right now because they only have 3 tight ends and they like to run a lot of that. Notre Dame could. It's the combination of being thin right now at both of them that's the problem, right? And tight end, it's more about you're fine because you've got an injured player in Kane Barong. If he wasn't injured, it'd be okay. You've got 2 kids coming into the fall. Tight end will be fine when everybody gets healthy and gets here. Sure. Receivers gonna still be thin even when everybody gets on campus and everybody gets healthy. It's still gonna be. So yeah, I would say that. I would agree with that. Absolutely agree with that. Okay.
A lot of great questions today, by the way.
Yes, a ton. Jay Golden 44, great article for sure. Thanks for representing what a lot of fans wanted to say. And I honestly didn't even think about that last night, Ryan. I was looking at it strictly from the players needed a voice, and I felt like I was given the okay from some of them to be that voice. I was not prepared. Like, I thought there was going to be a lot more pushback against my article than there was. I really did, because there's been a lot of the whole Kelly's won more games and blah, 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 and whatever. There was very little of that last night. And I think it's because Brian Kelly finally went too far. Yeah. Even some of the people that have supported him and said, hey, look, he's gone. It's just, let's move on. Because again, this was all in response to him and what he said. And then it was in multiple articles. There was one in the Dentist, and that one was even worse, because you had Kelly plus Dennis Dodd, who's always been anti-Notre Dame. Ralph Rousseau in the AP is a professional. He's a good writer, and he presented he presented Kelly's side, but he did so in more of a, here's just presenting what he said, and here's the facts.
Informational.
Right. Yeah. There was a couple things like, Kelly's rings. Kelly has 0 rings from his time at Notre Dame. Like, he's talking about like major bowl wins, 0. I mean, when I made the comment and it was a shot at Kelly, he's 0 in major bowl games and playoffs and BCS games. That wasn't a shot. That was a fact. Yeah. I said it in a snarky manner purposefully, but it was a fact. He's 0 in those games. And then somebody else was like, he did dominate in bowl games. I'm like, dominate who? A 7-6 Iowa State team in Rutgers? Because they didn't dominate everybody else. I mean, you had Miami, who was in the midst of a coaching change. They lost to Florida State in a bowl game. They barely beat LSU twice. And those were both great wins, but they weren't dominant wins. So but I'll be honest with you, Ryan, I got very little pushback last night and today. Very little, much less than I thought. And I think a lot of it is because I do think Brian Kelly has just stepped in it one too many times.
Well, I actually went through your tweet this morning because I was telling Joe about it, and I saw nothing but like thanks and great points and all the time. I didn't see anything.
Very
really.
Little. Yeah. Like, there was one guy that's like, I'm going to unfollow you now. But even his unfollow, he did it in a respectful manner, and it was just like, I'm tired of talking about Brian Kelly. I want to move on. I got an email today from a guy who I respect, and I'm really so glad he's a part of our community. He's like, and he doesn't like that we talk about Kelly as much as we do. That's fair. That's fine. Fair. Whatever. Yeah. But I got very little of that, and much less than I thought I was, because again, I think at the end of the day, I didn't realize how many fans had this much anger boiling up for him.
Right.
And I think that speaks volumes for who he was, that he could kind of get that response. MT41, if you guys had your choice, would you rather have Christian Gray or Micah Tease in this class? I'm going to speak for Ryan here, and I want to see if I know. Micah Tease, and it's not even a debate. Is that accurate, Ryan?
Yep, it is. It is. I think that Micah Tease is just a little bit of a high caliber of an athlete. I think Christian Gray is a good football player, though, but I think I just think you can get a little more out of Micah Tease.
So you think it's closer than I think it is? I don't think it's close.
Well, no, I don't think it's that close. I just didn't want it to sound like I was completely, showing.
Christian Gray is a solid football player.
That's what I was saying.
200 caliber player. Right. I don't think he's what some people make him out to be, and I just think Christian Gray is more dynamic. Plus, I do like the fact that Christian Gray can play on both sides of the ball. And anyone that knows me knows, if you have a kid that can legit be a starter or a legit player for you on both sides of the ball, that adds so much value to a player.
Oh yeah, Micah Tease could play at Notre Dame at wide receiver or corner, in my opinion. But
and safety.
And safety, yeah. And ball skills are really good. He's an explosive athlete. I just think he's a high caliber of an athlete comparative to Christian Gray. That's all.
John Lacey says, what are your thoughts on special team changes? I'd like to get back to the Tommy Zibikowski days on punt returns. What changes do you all see specifically in punt returns this year? The thing we have to understand is punting in college football has changed since Tommy Zibikowski was at Notre Dame. And the spread punt and the rugby punt has changed the game. It has. And there hasn't been a punt return rule in place to counter that. Like, for example, there's not a rule where you can't go past the line. Like, to me, there should be a rule similar in there where it's kind of like a pass. You can't be so far past the line of scrimmage, when the ball's thrown or something like that, and those rules can get a little bit difficult to enforce. But it's just those things have changed the game. You're just not going to see punt returns the way that we did in the past. I think the counter that I would take to that, Ryan, is I think if you know that you're not going to get, you can't set up like, remember when we were kids, and I'm sure even when I'm older about, but when you still had it, you'd have the wall return, right? Remember that? You don't have that anymore. You can't do that anymore. You can't get enough guys down there. They're getting on the ball too quickly. It's just different now. So my counter, and I've always said this, my counter to that would be, if you know you're not going to get returns, then be more aggressive going after the punt.
Sure.
Force them to stay more in protection than they ideally would like to be, and be more aggressive going after it. So one of two things can happen there positively for you. One is you block a kick, which is huge. Two is, actually three positives. Two is you keep more guys protecting, which then gives your guy the ability, because punt returns, even back in the day of the wall, was always about you got to make one guy miss, right? That's what made Rocket and Ricky Waters and Devin Hester. And Devin Hester could always make that one guy miss. And then after that, it's, then it's like, okay, you've got some help. And then the third is if punters, especially guys that maybe are inexperienced, if they're always worried that you're coming at them, there's a greater risk that they shank it or hit a line drive. And that's when you can get a return. So I think, to me, and that's one thing I never, like Notre Dame was maddening under Brian Polian. They would literally step up and just stop and engage, and like one guy would run through, and they just all stay at the line. It's like, if you're going to do that, just go try to set up a return or something. Like, you're doing nothing, So to me, either try to set up a return, which I don't love, or go attack. That's what I would do more of, Ryan. I'd be more aggressive. Not, again, you run the risk of hitting the punter and it being a penalty and all that. I get that. But I think there's way more good that can come from it than that. And I would be a much more aggressive. The only time I maybe wouldn't be is if it is a short yardage situation. Like, so maybe, hey, if it's fourth and less than 5, maybe, depending on what part of the field you're on, maybe then, because then a running into gives you a first down. Whereas if it's 4th and 9 and I get flagged for running into whatever, they punt it again. Sure. That's where I think some strategy needs to be involved in it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm always for aggressive-ness. I'm a defensive guy by trade, so I dig that. I think, and I'm correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but didn't Brian Mason's punt coverage unit, didn't they have the most blocked kicks last year, if I remember correctly?
So. I'd have to look that up, but they blocked a lot. I think it was like something like 6 or something like that. Let me look it up.
It was. I think it was an impressive number, if I remember correctly. So in theory, you're going to get your wish. It sounds like so.
Right. See, of course, they don't have it on the stats that I'm looking at. So let me go to Cincinnati's football stats and I'll look it up. But I think that's part of the reason that Marcus Freeman brought him in too, right? Is I don't think you bring a guy in and say, hey, don't do what made you so good at the place I brought you from. We've seen coaches do that, right? Notre Dame's last coach did that. He's not alone. There have been other coaches that have done that. I've never understood that. But I don't think you bring him in to say, okay, here's what made you good there. We're going to stop doing that. So we'll see. I'm going to try to look up these numbers real quick. And of course, the internet's being a little slow today for some. Well, I don't know if the internet is. Cincinnati's site is being slow today, so I don't quite know why. But we'll get to that answer here in a second. All right, here we go. It's special teams. They blocked 3 punts, which is a lot, and they blocked 3 field goals. So yeah, they had 6 blocked punts last year, or 6 blocked kicks last year. That's a lot. I dig that. And I think that also leads into being better in the return game, right? Because one thing Notre Dame was good at the last couple of years is they were pretty good on coverage. I think they didn't give up a lot on returns. They weren't a team that gave up a ton. Cincinnati, I don't know if they're much of one, but to me, blocked punts, and then the Cincinnati last year finished 31st in punt returns at 10 yards a return. Notre Dame was 63rd. If you can give me that kind of jump, I'll take that.
Yeah. Well, and I'm excited about punt return unit just in general because we saw some interesting guys returning punts during that open practice, by the way. Saw Lorenzo Styles back there. We saw Jadarian Price back there. Some intriguing players, I think, because I liked Kyron as a punt returner because I thought he was just like no nonsense, going to get north and south, and I dig that. But a couple of the guys that they had back there in the practice, they have just a little bit more wiggle, they have a little bit more juice than Kyron, so it should be interesting.
Yep, good question, John. Ryan Schulte says, Ryan, any thoughts on where you think Troy Anderson from Montana State ends up in the draft? Is he being overhyped because of his combine numbers?
So I think that going into the process, Troy was probably a day 3 type of player, but I would not be shocked if he's selected somewhere in the 3rd round now because, like you mentioned there, Ryan, he at 6'3", 240 plus pounds, ran 4.42 and had a, just crazy overall athletic showing at the combine. But I think it really does translate onto the film. It's a weird guy because he came to Montana as he was going to play linebacker, but they had an injury at quarterback, so they kept him on the offensive side of the football. And he was actually an all-conference quarterback. He was an option quarterback. He was like a wildcat type, basically. He ran for like 1,400 yards. And he actually set the Montana State single-season rushing touchdown record. He ran for like 21 touchdowns in one season or some crazy number when he was like a freshman. So then they started making the transition. Hey, you're not really a quarterback. Let's move you to linebacker. And then he got kind of pushed like he's still a wildcat quarterback to a degree. And in 2020, he really took a step it was kind of a weird role. They put him on like an on-ball role a little bit, Brian, in like a 3-4 alignment type. So he's rushing the quarterback a ton, doing a bunch of different like versatile things. And then finally this past year, they used him as a traditional stack backer. They're playing him like basically like a full-time will. And that athleticism pops off the film, man. Like he can run for days and he is a great player in pursuit. And he has some instincts in coverage too, which is kind of rare for a player that is pretty still new to the position. So there's still some things to work out because from a diagnostic perspective, he just hasn't played a ton of linebackers. He's only played for 2 seasons. So he's still getting used to kind of like reading his keys and getting downhill and being able to read blocks effectively and do all that type of stuff. But there is a high upside for Troy Anderson. So I don't think he's overrated at all, John. I think that Ryan. Sorry, it's weird saying your own name in response to a question, but
John was the previous question.
John was the previous question. I'm sorry, Ryan, but yes, I think that he's going to be selected somewhere late day 2, and I think that his talent level is certainly worth that because again, you don't see many guys 6'3", 240 something running 4.42. Like that's just a different type of athlete.
Yeah, that's
silly. It's silly. Brian, you need to go. He was an under-recruited kid because he was from a small town. I forget what state it was. I think it was like Minnesota. I don't think it was Montana, but he had one of the silliest high school highlight tapes of all time, man. He did everything. It's like Leo Chanel. He came from a small school too, and they put him at like running back and option quarterback at times. It's just like he's just a better player than everybody around him, which is crazy. So
I dig it. Jacob Wasson wants to know, do you think Estime will have a breakout season at running back?
Sign me up.
First, let's define what that would mean for him. Because I think for a kid that only carried the ball 7 times last year, a breakout season could mean 2 completely different things.
It could. If we're talking strictly numbers, I think for me right now that most people are just kind of considering him the 3rd peg in the running back carousel type of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that you can technically have a breakout even if that ends up being true. But I think he could be a 500 plus rushing yard type of player this year, 8+ touchdown runner type of thing. And I think that he can challenge to being one of the top 2 running backs on the team. And for a guy that just carried the ball 7 times, like you said, I think that's a breakout, certainly.
Yeah, I think he could. It's the thing is, do you think Estime will have a breakout season? It's a little too early for me to say that he will, but he definitely could. I have no doubt that Audric Estime. Look, we talked about this somewhat recently. I think I think all 3 of the kids that are returners from last year could end up being the starter. I don't think there's any one of them that I would look at and say, I hope that guy's not the guy. They all could be that guy. They could all be number 2. They could all be number 3. They could all be, number 4 because Jadarian Price brings a lot to the table. But could he have a breakout? Absolutely. Wouldn't shock me. I'm not ready to predict who it's going to be at this point in time. Mike Sullivan said, scored section 28, row 8 tickets for the Blue Gold game. thinking my 13-year-old son would be impressed with them tickets. Nope. His only question was, will the guys from Irish Breakdown be there? Thanks for sharing that, Mike. I appreciate that. The good news is you can tell him you got the tickets and you're going to take him by the Irish Breakdown tailgate because I will be there, Ryan will be there, and Sean will be there for part of it. I'm not quite sure how long he's going to be there. Vince won't be there because Vince has a game that morning. So unless it gets canceled, Vince won't be there, but Ryan and I will definitely be there, and Sean will be there for part of it. We look forward to meeting you and your son. So let him know that we said that we are very, very much looking forward to meeting you and meeting your 13-year-old son. No question about it. So we appreciate that. Quinn Kibler said, Ryan went over to pack. He's already packing, Mike. So he's getting ready for the trip, for the tailgate. It was the one about the tailgate at the Blue Gold game.
Gotcha.
Quinn Kilber said, what is one 2023 recruit on each side of the ball that Notre Dame isn't on or a contender for that you wish they were?
Interesting question. Defensively, my mind immediately went towards cornerback, but I think I'm going to change that a little bit. I'm going to go with Nicholas Harbor just because it's an embarrassment of riches, and he's probably the best just overall athletes. And I believe in the coaching staff, so I think that they can mold him into whether it's a rover or a will linebacker or a defensive end. Like, I really don't care. I just think that he has incredible talent. If you haven't watched him ton, he's out of Maryland. He's 6'5", 220. He's the kid that just went viral because he ran 10-3-1 or something like that, which is just a crazy time in the 100-meter dash. So he would be my guy. Offensively, I mean, they're trying to get back in with Deuce Robinson, but Deuce might be my answer, Brian, because I just think he's a difference maker at a position where, like, I like Cooper Flanagan, but if you get Deuce to go with Cooper Flanagan, and that is a dynamic tight end duo.
Yeah. I would definitely go with Deuce on that one. Nicholas Harbor, I would not go with him yet because I think he's a freaky athlete. I don't know if he's a freaky football player yet, though.
Not yet. You're right.
And so I say that, isn't it? I guess part of this answer goes to, do you think Notre Dame's a legitimate contender for Caleb Downs or not? If you think they are at least a contender, then my answer is A.J. Harris. Like, A.J. Harris is a dude at cornerback. And actually, sad thing is, like, his family grew up Notre Dame fans, but for whatever reason, A.J. was convinced that Notre Dame's not the place for him. I wish Notre Dame would have stayed on him and just till the end. I just wish they would have. They didn't. But it is what it is. But A.J. Harris is the one for me. And I think Nicholas Harbor is a freak. I think he could be a great player. But I feel like with Keon Keeley, with Osbury, if they're able to get him, with Mpemba, if they can get him, with the linebacking class they got last year, Notre Dame's pretty good there with or without Nicholas Harbor.
That's fair.
Corner's a different story. A.J. Harris significantly raises the talent. You get A.J. Harris and Justin Rhett in the same cornerback class, a year after Benjamin Morrison and Jaden Mickey, cornerback problems solved.
I knew that was going to be your answer, by the way. I knew it.
What, corner or just A.J. Harris?
At corner. Yeah. Well, I knew it was going to be A.J. Harris because it was going to be a corner. Yeah.
Yeah, because A.J.'s a beast. And I love Malik Muhammad, but A.J. Harris to me is the best corner in the country. With all due respect to the kid from down in Miami, he's the best corner in the country. I'll take him over. I think the problem with A.J. is he was so good so early that people have started to kind of pick holes in his game, and that's why other guys have kind of gone up in that one. But yeah, that would be an easy one for me. Offensively, I think Deuce is very fair. I think offensively, another one that I might look at is, and we have a question about it down here that I wanted to kind of to get to, and I can't see it, but it was one about Jaylen Brown, right?
True.
I think that receiver is one I would consider, but it's kind of like, but if they get Rodney Gallagher, I'm still okay with it. Deuce it's harder on offense, to be honest with you, because it'd be great to get Deuce, but it's like, but they did pretty good at tight end last year. I try to look at a position where, offensively, like they've actually done pretty well, or they're in on the guys at that position. I think corner is really the only position where I've had a little bit of a, head scratcher. Like, why are you quitting on that kid?
Yeah.
I mean, especially with his background, that was a little bit frustrating for me.
I know you talked about last cycle, the fact that Notre Dame took a lot of like more interior offensive lineman types. So I did think of, because I don't think they're really a contender for Samson Okunlola. Like, I think they're going to keep recruiting him, but I don't think it's in a great spot. So, like, I even thought about maybe Samson as, offensive tackle type.
I could see that one, but I think they're a contender for him. I just don't think they're going to get him.
Fair.
That would be kind of the reason I wouldn't consider him. But I could get that one. I could get that one. And part of that goes down to, for me, is, I think we have a little bit of a different view on Charles Jagasol too, where I see him as a right tackle that could move inside, as opposed to a pure guard who maybe could play right tackle. But now, if Monroe Freeling commits somewhere else, then my answer is easy. I'll pick an offensive tackle that they're not in on and go after him, because I do think if you miss him, your situation at left tackle for the future is a little bit shaky. You have to remember, when this class shows up, the current young tackles will be juniors, which means they could both be gone. I mean, Notre Dame has to recruit. Like, there's a chance both of these cats leave after their junior year. They have to prepare for that.
Because there's a chance
whether it happens or doesn't, you have to prepare for that. I mean, think about it. I mean, Joe Walt's going to have over 30 career starts at that point in time. And, maybe he comes back because he's a smart kid and all that. Maybe Blake Fisher comes back, but you have to at least prepare like they're not going to. And then if they do come back, or one of them comes back, your depth is fine. And I don't want to have to necessarily replace them in 2024 with a freshman. And I'm not sold that the guys that they got last year are tackles. There's a chance Notre Dame only signed one guy that stays a tackle last year. That's it. Because I'm not sold that Ty Chan stays a tackle. I'm not. And I definitely don't see him as a left tackle. Emil Wagner could be that guy, but what if he doesn't fill out? What if my biggest concern for Emil Wagner pans out? So I have a lot of questions about the future at tight end beyond the two starters. I do. And that's why this class is important, and why, if you talk about which of all the O linemen, or which, after Dante Moore, who's the most important recruit on offense, I don't think we're talking enough about Monroe Freeling being that guy. I think we immediately go to receivers, and I get it, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, but I think we need to have more of a conversation about Monroe Freeling being that guy that's, boy, man.
Agree.
Because, again, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, Ryan. Which position is more important, offensive line or receiver? So I think the only saving grace there is if Notre Dame's going to be able to get a transfer, especially an undergrad transfer, I would think offensive line might be positioned where it's a little bit more doable, especially as a grad transfer. I mean, there's going to be grad transfers that maybe are day 2 NFL draft picks that are going to look at Notre Dame and being like, if I go play for Harry Heastand for a year, I may become a day 1 NFL draft pick. Let's be honest, that conversation will happen in living rooms from time to time here over the next few years, as long as Harry Heastand's at Notre Dame. Here's one, Ryan. From Corey D. Who will be the 3 starting linebackers in Columbus? That would obviously be for the Ohio State game, for those who maybe didn't quite think about that.
I'm going to say the starting Mike is JD Bertrand. I'm going to say the starting Will is Maris Leufel, and the starting Rover, I'm going to defer to 27. His name just escaped me for some reason.
You mean 24? Jack 24. Kaiser?
Jack Kaiser, yes. Jack Kaiser would be my defer for Rover for now. I hope that there's a lot more mixing in of linebackers this year. I hope that Prince Collie gets a ton of play inside. I hope that, hopefully we'll see kind of the depth that we're over what that looks like. But I think that that's the 3 starters, including Rover, for me.
I can't disagree. I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. I'm good with that. Will Chesanik, Ryan, would you say Colsey has most NFL potential of the receivers in Notre Dame? Low Styles has potential to be a better college receiver production-wise, but scouts have to be salivating about Colsey's measurables.
I don't think so, to be honest. I mean, because for me, I think that Lorenzo Styles has the type of profile that could play all over the place at the next level, right? Like, I think we're kind of seeing it right now. Like Deion Colsey, I think he could be a really good W, but like, are you going to move him around a ton? Like, he could be a really good in that spot, but I think Lorenzo Styles, from a athleticism perspective, has everything you look for. And I just think that he's a guy that, and I think the NFL is moving more towards this, Will, in my opinion, is the fact that like you want guys that can move all over the formation. It's not about pencil a guy in a slot, pencil a guy into a Z to an X. Like, it's more about Devontae Adams can line up everywhere. Cooper Kupp can line up everywhere. These guys can line up all over the place. So I think Lorenzo Styles is going to be a very coveted player if his progression keeps going the way it's going. But I think Deion could too, but I just think that he gives you maybe just a little more flexibility from an alignment perspective.
I think that's also, we have to look at the NFL too, Ryan, is you're seeing as you see more and more of the Sean McVay influence in the NFL, you're seeing size becoming less and less and less of a thing in the NFL, right? And so I think that's part of it too, is you don't have as many teams looking for that 6'5", 215-pound guy right now. Not that they don't like it, but guys, I want route runners. I want fast guys. I want this. I want that. I want another Tyreek Hill more than I want another Mike Evans. I mean, that's what people are going to say. So I think that has to be thought about too, is now what will it be in 2 years? I mean, the NFL and college football, it changes so much now, so frequently. But I would say that I've always felt that Deion has the highest ceiling. I do think that. But I don't think highest ceiling in college is the same as NFL potential, because it's a different game. I think a 6'5" athletic guy in college is going to have a greater impact than maybe he would in the NFL for a number of reasons. One of which being the hashes, because the boundary receiver position is different in the NFL than it is in college in a lot of instances. I don't know if you agree with that, Ryan, but I think that's part of it as well.
No, I agree.
Cover TD36. Do you think Notre Dame will update their jerseys in the near future, take advantage of the recruiting momentum? I don't know if like changing the jerseys is going to have a huge impact on recruiting momentum. I have been told that Marcus Freeman and people at Notre Dame have had conversations with Under Armour and some folks about what things are going to look like. I don't know what came of that. I don't have any scoop in regards to this is the conversation and they're going to do this. I just know that uniform conversations have been had. That's true. That's not even, I'm not even saying like, that's all I can tell you. That's all I know. So I don't know anything beyond that. So it'll be interesting to find out, but the summer's more of a time when I'll do some looking into that. But all I care about is change the pants. That's the biggest thing for me. Go Irish, from the 1990s forward, who would you choose as Notre Dame's all-time most feared backfield? Quarterback, running back, fullback, didn't have to play together. Your Hall of Famers. So didn't have to play together. Okay, so you don't have to pick guys from the same year.
Sure.
Quarterback, so from 1994, I mean, so that's got to count Rocket, right? Because Rocket played in 1990.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
If you want to count him as a running back, but so 1990 on, so from Rick Meyer on at quarterback, be Reggie Brooks and actually Ricky Watt. No, wait a minute. Did Ricky Waters play in 90? No, he didn't play in 90. 89. Wait a minute. Did Ricky Waters play in 90? Hold on a second.
He may have.
Yeah, because he's one guy that I always kind of forget what his last year was at Notre Dame. So Ricky Waters, 90 was his last year at Notre Dame. And this is crazy. Ricky Waters never rushed for more than 791 yards at Notre Dame.
Yep.
That's just how loaded they were at running back.
What was Bettis' last year?
His last year was 92.
92.
So him, I mean, honestly, the most feared backfield from Notre Dame played in the same year, in my opinion. And that's Reggie Brooks and Jerome Bettis. I mean, you can maybe pick a different quarterback than Rick Meyer. I would. But other than maybe Julius Jones, because I always forget about Reggie when I have these conversations, but that backfield was filthy, and Reggie was really, really good and explosive. So I'd probably go with the 92 backfield, running back, fullback. I mean, even today, that'd be lethal. I mean, could you imagine a 1-2 punch of those two guys? Oh, yep. Sign me up.
And Brady Quinn at quarterback?
Brady Quinn at quarterback, or people aren't going to like this.
Oh, no.
If I can just take 1 year, I'm still 09 Jimmy Clausen was in today's offense would be a monster. I mean, he would be so good in today's offense. I mean, could you imagine Jimmy Clausen running like this? Here's okay. People ask at the very beginning, what wouldn't you love to see a Jack Cohn, running this offense? Well, if you're excited about Jack Cohn running this offense, with all due respect to Jack Cohn, what would Jimmy Clausen do in this offense, right? I mean, Now you wouldn't be getting a ton of leadership from the quarterback position, but at this point in time, okay, Avery Davis is a captain. You've got, I don't give a crap. Just complete 75% of your passes. That's all I care about, because Jimmy would be an easy 72, 73% completion guy in today's game. I don't think people realize how much Jimmy completed 68% of his passes, and he was very much a downfield passer. He wasn't throwing a million look screens and RPOs like. Can you imagine what Jimmy Clausen's completion percentage would have been if he was running an RPO offense?
Pretty good.
Yeah. So you know who the other guy is. I've always said I would love to see this guy in a modern offense. It's Jarius Jackson. Yeah, I'd love to see him in a modern offense, like kind of doing what Tyler Buckner does. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one backfield of the same year, it'd be 92. Including quarterback, because Rick Meyer was a good quarterback, and Rick Meyer would have been a lot better in today's era too than he was back then. He was a drop back quarterback trying to run an option offense, which one of the things that I don't necessarily always agree with from Coach Holtz's era. But here we go. Ethan O'Connor, been meaning to ask this for a while. What are your thoughts on Xavier Watts playing nickel? Not the biggest fan of the play from the position in recent years. We talked about this recently, Ryan.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this? Because I'd be all for it against a run oriented, like an offense that runs a little bit more. I would be fine with it against a Ohio State. Maybe I would be fine with it against Clemson. I don't know how much I would love it against USC. Right.
That's fair. Yeah. Now I think so. My biggest dilemma with the safety position right now is I am a big fan of Brandon Joseph. Obviously, I really like Ramon Henderson and I really like Xavier Watts. I think they all play at a high level potentially, but it's going to be tough to get them all three on the field all the time. So I'm a fan of kind of having that safety nickel kind of be a little more interchangeable at times. So I would love getting Xavier Watts on the field if that's what it means. And I agree, against the heavier run teams, makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I would give it a look for sure. I would honestly cross train a little bit, Ethan, between safety and nickel, like moving forward. I would, because I think that there can be a little bit of interchangeableness there. I don't think you have to just say this guy is purely a nickel. Like, I just don't think that's the world that we live in anymore. I think that you can look at Xavier Watts and say, okay, we're going to get some corner work today. We're going to get some safety work tomorrow. We're going to, have some interchangeableness to playing inside of nickel. I think so.
All right, we have a super chat from Alberto, our buddy from Spain. Hello from sunny Spain. Sorry if I missed a response to this, but did I hear Harry Hiestand poo on all things Kelly in his most recent interview? I didn't take it that way at the time. At least not. I don't know if Harry Hiestand gives a crap enough about Brian Kelly to take a shot at him. I don't. I think it was more about praising the staff now as opposed to praising the staff while contrasting before. Maybe he did. And it wouldn't shock me from the standpoint of, I know he wasn't fond of Brian Kelly. I know that for a fact. There's no love lost there. I just don't. It just seemed like if it was, it'd be a little bit out of character for Coach Hiestand. So as much as I would love to say Harry Hiestand took a shot at Brian Kelly, because I would love that, I just don't know if I could say it was. I'm not as comfortable with that, Ryan. Did you hear Coach's comments in the interview yesterday? It's just basically like,
no.
When they asked him, the staff, he was like, I love the staff. And it's like, people work. And we'll see. Ryan, do you got to run? I got some more questions here I'm going to work through. If you could just do me a favor, if you could go before you take off, if you could just go beneath Alberto's and just see if there's any super chats or definite questions that I want to get into and star them, because I can't stay a whole lot longer, but I do want to try to get to some more of these questions, because I feel like because we took the early on for us to talk about the article that we didn't get to as many questions. So
yeah,
I'll try to get to some more. So
sounds good.
Okay, let's get down here. So we have Joseph Steve, I love the article about Kelly. Thank you, Joseph. Coach Freeman is the truth. Agree. My family and I have tickets to the spring game, and we are stoked to see the team. It's going to be fun. It really is. It's going to be a lot of fun. Michael S. with a super chat. I fear recruiting. Thank you for that, Michael, by the way. I fear recruiting is now an all-out bidding war. Top recruits like Moore and Tate are doing the grand tour to see which team will offer the most money. Will Notre Dame even play on that field, play for pay? Number one, Notre Dame is playing on that field because there are opportunities for NIL money for players. Number two, a lot of people keep saying what you're saying. There's no evidence of it. And I can tell you right now, Dante Moore is not going around the country looking to see who's going to pay the most money. He's not making 9 trips back to Notre Dame to see when will Notre Dame pony up. That's not what's happening. Now, may he be influenced by an NIL? Yes. But it would be more of, I really love these 2 schools, and this school is offering more than this school, so I'm going to pick that school, maybe. But I just, look, it's not – recruiting is an all-out bidding war with some players. It's not true for others, because the thing that you have to understand, Michael, is money has been a big part of recruiting for a long time. And there's always been kids who are just going to go where they're going to get the most money. That's not true of every kid. It never has been true. It never will be true. And especially now, I think Notre Dame fans are looking at this wrong. The fact that Notre Dame can now offer money, it not directly, but opportunities for money, is something that I think helps Notre Dame. And until they start losing recruit after recruit to that, I'm just not going to buy it, because right now Notre Dame has the best recruiting class in the country, just signed its best class in almost a decade, and did all that in the midst of NIL being a thing. And so I don't see it the way that you see it. Leopard Irons, do you think Buckner's expectations will be like Rick Meyer his freshman year, or do you think he'll need to do more? I don't think he'll need to do more. I think the thing about it is I actually think Buckner as a redshirt freshman could do very similar things to what Rick Meyer did as a redshirt freshman in 1990, because I think that he's a more dynamic runner. I never felt Rick Meyer was a great fit for the Lou Holtz offense. Tyler Buckner fits this offense, so I think he'll be more effective. But I think philosophically, I don't think Notre Dame's going to put the offense on Tyler Buckner's shoulders the way it will in year 2 and year 3 as a starter. So I think he'll be asked to make more plays than Rick Meyer did, just because of the nature of the offense. But I also don't think it's a situation where he's going to be asked to carry the team, and Rick Meyer wasn't asked to carry the team in 1990. So in some ways it's similar, but I think Buckner will be asked to do more as well. I think both of your options are correct, in my opinion. I think he'll be asked to do more, but there'll be some similarities between the two. Jacob Watson asks, do you think BK's comments give the team and staff extra motivation for the upcoming season? I will say this. I'm pretty confident that there's a lot of people at Notre Dame that are aware of what Brian Kelly said. And do I think it'll be provide motivation? To a degree, but stuff like that, something that was said on April 7th, is likely not going to last until August. So I think those things have a shorter shelf life. I think this team is already very, very self-motivated. I think this team has much bigger things to focus on than whatever Brian Kelly said. I think it's like a dark cloud has kind of been removed from the team. And I'm just telling you what people tell me that are part of the program, and what parents tell me about what they're hearing from their sons. They're pushed harder. And this is what I've been told by several parents. They get worked so much harder now by the coaches, but they love it. They're having so much more fun. Even though, again, being worked harder, having more fun. So the constant misconception of what a player's coach is. A player's coach is someone who, there's a time and a place for, the hug and the kiss. That's more in the office when a kid's coming to you with whatever his personal issues are. But when we're out in the field, we're working. And just because I don't get in your face and MF you doesn't mean I'm not challenging you and pushing you. And a true player's coach is someone who will push players beyond their what they think they're capable of. And that's happening at Notre Dame right now. And they're loving it because, again, as I've said to people before, great players, competitors want to be challenged. They want to be pushed. And contrary to Brian Kelly's comments yesterday, the Notre Dame players want to be great, and they're willing to work for it. Brian Kelly wanted to be great at Notre Dame. He just didn't want to work for it. He wanted to kind of get off of everyone else, live off of what everybody else was doing. So, so let's get over here. So let's get to Michael Hughes. This isn't meant in a snarky way. If you were picking a team of players that best represented the BK era, who would you pick? I only know of one player that I could think of being on that, and that would be I would have Ian Book as my quarterback. Beyond that, I don't know if I want to go that way because I don't think there's any way I could answer that question of a whole team that would be received well, nor would I really want to do it. But other than Ian Book, a quarterback, I don't really know who I would have on that, to be completely honest with you. MT41 with a question. I'm sure Tyler Buckner's seen all the Dante Moore excitement the past few months. Is that something the coaching staff talks to Buckner about? Like Reese telling Buckner he's still their guy. I don't think Buckner's worried about that. And if he was, I would be worried about Buckner. The reality is Dante Moore is not going to be on the football team in 2022. And if Tyler Buckner handles his business, he shouldn't have to worry about Dante Moore in 2023. He'll be a third-year guy. He'll have plenty of opportunities to kind of go out there and show that he's the guy for the job and all those different types of things. And you know, I don't think it's something that he's necessarily concerned about, to be completely honest with you. I don't think that's really a big focus of his. So, and it shouldn't be. So, I mean, does he know who Dante Moore is? I'm sure. Just like the quarterbacks knew who he was during recruitment, because when he visits, they're going to want him to, you know, to meet him. So that's kind of the, you know, that's about as far as it goes. Kyle Wade, question: would you rather the offense focus on being dominant in the run game every week? Excuse me, that came on quickly. Hold on a second. Oh, stung a little. Kyle Wade says, question: would you rather the offense focus on being dominant in the run game every week, or would you prefer them to play the weaknesses of the defense more? My example is the Patriots with Tom Brady. Kyle, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I think you can do both of those things. I'm a big fan of every week you go into it saying, hey, let's find the weaknesses of what this opponent does. So they're not good at this particular player's not good, or they're not good against 3-by-1 because they run this particular coverage, and this coverage is one that we can exploit. So it's not just, or that their weakness is 3-by-1 because they overplay the 3-by-1, which gives us some opportunities to run the ball weak side. So there's all types of things that you look at and focus on a weakness of the defense. And it's not always personnel. Some of it's schematic, some of it's leverage wise, some of it's numbers. You know we can get them here and those type of things. So I think it all depends on the opponent, but you should always go into a game looking to take advantage of their weaknesses. And then your philosophy is, okay, well, how are you going to take advantage of those weaknesses? That's where the run game, pass game, different things comes into play, Kyle. So, I mean, I would always say I prefer to play to a team's weaknesses, but what are you using to attack a team's weaknesses? So I don't think those things are exclusive, mutually exclusive. I think those things too, they build on top of each other. The first thing you figure out is, you know, this is how we would game plan. Who are the guys we need to go after? What are the things schematically we can do to exploit them? You know, you really break down the other team. They say, okay, now what can we do with who we believe we are? You know, here's our top playmakers. We got to find ways to get them the ball that attack this team this way. We're a great running team, so here's how we're going to use that to attack this team's weaknesses. I think those two things, to me, should go together. William Campbell, what Kelly implied about the Notre Dame players not wanting to be great was unconscionable. I hope the current and former players know that the true Notre Dame family disagrees. William, I can assure you of this. I've talked to enough players about this the last 24 hours. They know that this is a Brian Kelly issue, not a Notre Dame fan issue. That's what I'll say. Blake Merrick says, is anyone else worried Dante Moore commits only to have Reese leave at season's end, causing him to then decommit, leaving us empty-handed? You know, Blake, we could run a million scenarios about every kid, and the reality is I'm at the place now where I'm going to worry about the things that I know I need to worry about. And right now, Dante, I don't know that Tom Reese is going to leave. I think there's this assumption going around that Tom Reese is bolting at the end of the year. I don't think that's true. It could happen if the right opportunity comes, but I don't think that's necessarily true. Nor do I think by that point in time that Dante's just going to leave. Because I think Dante's smart enough to know that no matter where you go, there's no guarantee the guy you're going to play for is going to be that coordinator. There's so much turnover so frequently now that I think kids are smart enough to know that the coach matters. I mean, you're not going to go to a place where the coach doesn't matter, but it's not the end all be all, in my opinion. The other thing I would add is that Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden and those guys have also done enough work with Dante where it's not just Tommy Reese that's doing that recruitment. Douglas Road Roundabouts. I was hoping to get to this answer before Ryan left, but he had to go pick up his daughter. How many of Notre Dame's projected starters in the offensive line do you predict will be in the NFL, and to what degree of success? I know the last part is speculative. I think right now both parts are speculative, to be completely honest with you. We need to see. I mean, Jarrett Patterson will be, but I mean, Blake Fisher's played 1.5 games of college football. Joe Walsh played like 7. I mean, there's a lot of talent there, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves with that. I want to see this group play together first. I think there's a lot of guys. There's guys that are going to be backups that I think have NFL talent, but we got to see how they're going to develop. And I'm just not quite there yet to really kind of focus too much on that stuff. Here's a good question from Brian Denbo. Talking about blocking when the tight end blocks, is that run through the O-line coach or the tight ends coach? At Notre Dame in the past, it's been both, especially when Harry Hiestand was here, because you have to have a tight ends coach, number one, that's good enough to, coach those guys. You can't have it to be all the time where it's a situation where the tight end coach is teaching his thing and the O-line coach is teaching his thing. They have to be on the same page, especially in this offense where Notre Dame's going to have tight ends attached. Now, in other offenses where the tight ends never attach to the line of scrimmage and he's maybe more of a flex player, it's not as important. But in Notre Dame's offense, it's very important to have those guys. They have to be on the same page. And I think that you're going to see a lot of that. Harry Hiestand being involved with the tight ends, and Jared Parker would be silly not to allow that. And he will. I mean, you've got to work with him. At the same time, you need your tight end coach to be able to teach the same things that the O-line coach is teaching and his degree, because it is going to be a little bit of a different animal. So it's both, but it's always going to be the individual position coach more than it is the complementary. Kind of like you're going to see, the O-line coach is going to have things to say to the running backs, but there's got to be a line that you can't cross. Not a line you can't cross on like what you say, but just like, hey, you got to give his position coach a chance to do that first. And that can kind of be that can be a little bit of a challenge, in my opinion. Okay. Oh, here it was. MT41. Brian, if you could take only one of these guys, who would it be, Jaylen Brown or Caleb Downs? For me, I'm going Caleb Downs. I think safety is a very, very important position. I think Caleb Downs is a better prospect than Jaylen Brown, and I love Jaylen Brown. But I also think that the difference in talent at that position is such that Notre Dame's going to be more okay at receiver. And safety, Caleb Downs would give you a significant upgrade, especially if they're able to keep Peyton Bowen. You put those two guys together, and all of a sudden you have an elite safety group with those two plus a Don Schuler. So if I could have one of those two, it's an easy answer for me. It's Caleb Downs, to be honest with you. And that's no shot at Jaylen Brown, because Jaylen Brown's really good. And if Jaylen Brown called up tomorrow and said, I want to come to Notre Dame, I'd take him in a heartbeat. It's a heck of a player. We'll get to a few more of these. We do got to get out of here soon. So I want to just get to some more of these here real quick. Ben Tarnowski, you asked this yesterday, Ben. Do y'all think the Tennessee State game is a good addition to the schedule, or does it hurt us? We had a whole discussion about this at the beginning of, was it Wednesday's show? I would encourage you to listen to that. I don't think I can do justice to the nuance of the discussion that we had in just an answer to a mailbag question. So I would just encourage you to go listen to the beginning of, I believe it was Wednesday's show, where we kind of lay out our stances on that. And I definitely lay out mine for sure. Brandon Bauer says, Brian, let's say the playoff expands to 12 teams. I feel there should be a rule allowing an independent to be in the top 4 if they beat 2 conference champs. This is a good point. Example, 2029, we beat Bama and USC. And hypothetically, they win the SEC and the Pac-12. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, and that would be true this year, Brandon. I mean, let's just say it was a 12-team playoff this year too, Brandon. It's like, you're going to have Ohio State and Clemson. There's a good chance you beat that. I think there could be sort of an exception to that. I think that's something nuanced. I never really thought about that, but yeah, I like that. Because then it was like, okay, if they beat more than one of the teams that are going to be ranked in the top 4, I think that would be part of it maybe too, or, maybe they beat a team if they won a head-to-head. Like, so that'd be another example that I never really thought of. Like, let's say, that Notre Dame goes 12-0 in 2029 and they beat Bama and USC, and, USC's, behind them. But let's say Bama's going to be a higher seed, right? You could say, well, look, if they have a head-to-head win over a team ranked in the top 4, that they then are eligible to be in the top 4. I could see something like that being a good argument. I like that outside the box thinking, Brandon. I never really thought about that. I dig that. I dig that. Colin Park asks, I've read that official visits can begin being taken in April and others say July. Which is it? And is it the same time every recruiting cycle? It is the same time every recruiting cycle, and their kids can't take officials now. They can't. And the kids that are taking, so here's where I think people might be confused. Jabron Payne is taking an official visit to Notre Dame this weekend, but that's because Jabron Payne is a 2022 recruit. He can take official visit. He's got 5 officials. That process has already started. He can take an official visit whenever he wants. The kids that are 2023 kids, that official visit window has not begun for them yet. None of them have taken official visits. So that perhaps could be why there's a bit of a difference there. Maybe some people are confused, but if you're an underclassman, rising senior, you can't take officials until June. June. Irish Guardian out. Let's say Notre Dame comes out and smashes Ohio State week 1. Who currently on the board would be swayed with a showing like that? It's a good question. If they're not committed at the time, I think Cardinal Tate would certainly be swayed by that. If he's not committed, a Jason Moore, maybe a Samson Okunlola, if he's not committed by then. I think every kid would be swayed to a degree by Notre Dame smashing Ohio State. That would be a shockwaves type of outcome. Beating Ohio State's is going to be impactful, but if they blow Ohio State out, that would be a very eye-opening performance, and a lot of people would take notice of that. Jim Halloran with the super chat. Jim, thank you so much, very, very much for this. Brian, just to thank you for the BK article yesterday. Go Irish. Thank you for that, Jim. Seriously, very, very much. Sparkling Swan, Brian and Ryan, thoughts on bringing back white jerseys with green numbers for away? Love those jerseys. Sparkling Swan, I have said this before. And you and I are on the same page here. I personally would make the green letters the permanent road game. I just would. I don't love Notre Dame's road uniforms. I've never loved Notre Dame's uniforms with just the blue. I don't think it pops enough for me. And look, I played quarterback, so of course I care about how you look, when you're in your uniform. So for me, I would really dig that. I would dig the green jersey, the green number in the jersey for just a normal road game. I'm with you on that. Josh Miller asks, how often does an Emil Wagner situation happen where we have no idea that he's going to commit to Notre Dame, but all of a sudden he commits and you're like, okay. It used to happen all the time. It used to be a really, really, really normal thing. Now it doesn't happen as much. You have a pretty good idea when kids commit. You really don't get. It's not often you get kind of like caught off guard by a kid committing. It'll happen. Like last year, it was only once. And Maureen Walker was the only kid that I had no clue he was going to commit. I woke up one morning and he had already committed like 20 minutes before. It doesn't happen often. And besides the Maureen Walker or Emil Wagner, that one I didn't expect either. But on top of Emil, it only happened one other time last year, and that was a Maureen Walker. I didn't see that one coming, to be completely honest with you. Let's see here. Kay Grant, Brian and Ryan, what do you think Dante Moore needs to work on as far as his game goes? What are his strengths and weaknesses in your opinion? Okay, Grant, I would encourage you to watch the film breakdown that we did of Dante Moore. That's a lot. To give you like a really good answer, it's going to take a lot longer than I have right now. I would encourage you to watch that video. And there's also one written. I also wrote a film breakdown that has some clips of him throwing it in it, as well as if you'd prefer to read it. So if you can go to the message board, not the message board, but the website, and find that for Film Room Dante Moore SI, you'll be able to find that. But just real briefly, his strengths: super quick release, very accurate, incredibly high football IQ, good pocket presence, good pocket mobility, good leadership. Strong arm. I think he's just got the everything you want in a quarterback, except he's not a runner and he's not 6'5", 220. That's it. I mean, but other than that, as a passer, he's got tremendous arm talent. Things I'd like to see him work on, I think sometimes his footwork as he moves around at times can get a little bit off. He's going to have to reshape his body. He does not have a great body right now. I think he's not a guy that spends a lot of time in the weight room or doesn't look like he does because he's always traveling. He's playing in a 7-on-7. He's competing, and that's fine. But once you get to a college and you're not traveling and doing all that anymore, you're going to be more in the weight room, and I think his body's really going to take off there, and that's where you're going to see his arm even take a bigger jump. I think at times he does a great job off platform. At times, I think he maybe rushes it a little bit. I don't see a ton of weaknesses in his game, to be honest with you, other than just getting stronger, rehashing some things. He'll take some chances in high school that are fine now, but those won't work in college, and that's every quarterback like him is kind of be that way. Bobby S., better prospect, Pendleton or Saraveld? Are they both takes? I don't know if they're both takes, meaning like they're both takes right now. I don't know if they're both takes if one of them commits first. I don't know if they would take both of them. And I'm not saying they won't. I'm saying I don't know if they will. I have some doubts about that, but I'm not 100% certain of that. But better prospect, I personally, that's a tough one. You know what, Corey or Bobby? I'd have to watch him again. There's some things. Saraveld's a lot bigger, and I like that. He's a big, powerful kid. He's huge. He's 315. Pendleton has phenomenal punch, and his pop is just really outstanding. I'd have to watch their film and grade them. There's some things I like better about Saraveld. There's some things I like better about Pendleton. I don't know if I could say right now without really grading them and diving even deeper into the film if I could tell you who I think is better at this particular moment. They're both good football players. They're both 4-star caliber players. I'd have to watch a little bit more of the film. I think the one thing that makes me lean towards Pendleton is simply the fact that I do view him as a center, as a guy that would be a center down the road because of his combination of punch and quickness and decent length. But then again, Saraveld's I love the size he brings to the table, and he's a quality athlete for a guy that big. Probably lean towards Pendleton, but that's a tough one. I'd have to really dive in the film to feel more comfortable with that. Brandon Plesner says Dante and Tyler Buckner seem like two different players. So how does Dante fit into Reese's offense, and what changes need to be made in order to maximize Dante's ability? Nothing needs to change. We've talked about this before. They're not really that different players. I think that the biggest difference is Dante has a lot more experience, but Tyler's got a very quick release. He can throw off platform. He's smart. He throws with great anticipation. All things that we feel about Dante. I think that the problem that I have is that we are looking too much at what Tyler Buckner was as a freshman at Notre Dame and assuming that's who he is. He's not Malik Zaire. Go back and watch his high school film when he threw for 4,500 yards and 58 touchdowns as a junior. Dante has so much more experience that helps him. But I think Tyler has the chance to be a really good passer. And a lot of things that Dante does well as a passer, Tyler can do as well. Maybe not as well, but he can do them. So I think the only thing that changes if Dante takes over for Tyler is, Dante's just better at the things, the passing things, and Tyler's better as a runner. So you take out some of the running stuff. But I don't think you really need to change your offense. And I don't think they're necessarily two completely different players. I think if you just look at their Brandon, I'll tell you this, go back and look at Tyler's film as a junior and just watch him throwing. And you'll see some similarities between him and Dante. Like I said, quick release, accuracy, anticipation, all those type of things. There's actually a decent amount of similarities between the two. And thank you for the super chat, by the way. Corey S. says, who is the bigger brand? This is an interesting one. And it says, Ohio State or bigger brand, Ohio State or Michigan? Ohio State's the better football program right now. That's not debatable. I don't think any Michigan fan should debate that. But if we're talking brand, I still think Michigan's the bigger brand. I mean, you look at just all the sports, I think Michigan is still more of a national program of the two. I still think, you've got the jump man thing, which obviously carries a lot more weight, from a basketball standpoint. But I think if we're just talking brand, I still think Michigan's the bigger brand. I still think Ohio State is very much a regional school when it comes from a branding standpoint. the reason Ohio State goes nationally to recruit is that's different than being a national program. I'll find Michigan fans and Notre Dame fans everywhere I go. And I don't feel that I don't find that about Ohio State fans. So if we're going to talk about brand, just pure brand, Michigan's a bigger brand for me and has been forever, as long as I know. Now, could Ohio State do things to change that? Sure. But right now, I think Michigan's a bigger brand. I mean, I know Michigan's a state school, but Michigan has a different feel to it than Ohio State does about some things. But and Michigan's had more sort of like, I mean, you go back to like the basketball championship in 88, 89, you talk about the Fab Five. There's been a lot of sort of cultural defining moments that have gone through Michigan, especially with the Fab Five, that Ohio State's never really experienced. And so I would say that in a lot of different ways, Michigan is the bigger brand between the two. And I mean, as you guys know, my feeling on Michigan, so I don't like take great joy in saying that. But I mean, if we're being honest, I really don't think it's really all that close. We're talking brand, football program wise is a different story, but that wasn't your question. So last one, and then we're going to get out of here. MT41 says, "Hey, Brian, just jumping in here. Haven't watched the show yet. Don't know if you've seen on social media, but Notre Dame posted something today saying no excuses here. Love the BK shade." Yeah, I took that way. Notre Dame put a tweet out from practice and it said no excuses here. And it's just like 4 pictures of 4 players. I definitely took that as shade at Brian Kelly. And you know what? Good job, Notre Dame. I wish your social media team and your tech team was doing even more, like putting out videos of practice and, hype videos of your coaches and, stuff that's showing your coaches working so you could give those to recruits and all that, whatever. Different story. But at least for this one tweet, bravo. Very well done. I definitely took that as shade for sure. And I love it. I'm here for all of it. So very, very well done for Notre Dame. So everybody, there's a ton of questions I couldn't get to today, everybody. And I am sorry. There's just too many great questions. And my wife is sick and she sent me a couple text messages. I need to get her some stuff. But enjoyed the show today. But hey, this is why you need to be on the message board, because any questions that you don't have, let's start a message board post, like, hey, look, if you're a member of the board, like, let's just start maybe a thread that says, hey, hold over questions from the show or something like that. Throw your questions on there. Like Mace K says, join the message board. You can find it at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, or hit the smash the like button. He said, join the message board, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this podcast. All of it. I love it. Absolutely. But if you kind of come in and you throw some more things out there, I think that, we can answer those questions as we follow up. So if you're on the message board, do that. We'll definitely try to answer as many as we can, but I do got to run. So I thank you all so much. I appreciate all the support last night, today for the Brian Kelly article. Very, very much. I appreciate it very, very much. It means a lot to know that I'm not just speaking for myself, but there's a lot of people that felt that needed to be said, and I have a platform to say it, and I was able to say it. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that very, very much. So anyway, everybody, have an awesome rest of your day. We'll have a show tomorrow at some point in time. I think Sean and I are thinking about doing an O-line kind of show. We'll see how that goes. But we'll probably have a show tomorrow. But that's why you got to hit that notification bell so you'll know when we go live. You'll be able to see it. So have a great day, everybody. Sign up for the message board. Buy Built Bars. They got like this new caramel brownie flavor that I've never had before. I'm going to go buy that today. If you use the promo code below, Irish Breakdown promo code, you get 10% off that sucker. So lots of cool stuff going on. So anyway, thanks everybody for the show, for being with us today on the show. Tons and tons of great questions, including a bunch I couldn't get to, which I'm really sorry about. But we will definitely, if you bring them to the board and you ask the questions on the board, we'll get to them. So anyway, everybody have an awesome rest of your day, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. Thank you so much for being a part of the Irish Breakdown podcast.